The agenda this evening, we have applications, public hearings. We have a continued deliberation from December 15th, and that is the Planning Board 22-021 Site Plan Review, Fieldstone Land Consultants, PLLC, on behalf of Avanru Development Group, Limited, requests a site
Recording in progress.
for an age-restricted 74-unit multifamily development and associated site improvements on land owned by Paul Thomas located at 115 Old Homestead Highway. Subject property is shown at tax map 37, lot 7, and is located in the business district. Item B, Planning Board number 22-023, that's a site plan review. Public hearing, Brickstone Land Use Consultants, LLC, requests a site plan review on behalf of Swanzey Lake Campground, LLC, to construct a maintenance building, bathhouse, 36 full-service campsites, and associated site improvements on undeveloped land located on East Shore Road. Property is shown at tax map 45, lot 22-3, in the Rural Agricultural District, and that will be a continued hearing. Board number 23-001, multi-tenant application. It's a public hearing. Ronald Cormier requests to operate a shed/cordwood sales business in existing commercial property at 387 Monadnock Highway. Subject property is shown as tax map 16, lot 20-29, and is located in the business district. Under discussions and other business, we have a multi-tenant process change request from EDAC. Rules of procedure amendments, site plan review regulations, and any other business that may be required. So we have the minutes of December 8th, 2022, and December 15th, 2022. And does anyone, we'll take December 8th first. Any of the board members have any alterations or questions about the minutes from December 8th, 2022? And if not, a motion to approve as presented would be in order.
So moved.
A motion by Michael York to approve the minutes from December 8th, 2022. Is there a second? Seconded by Brandon Self. Is there any further discussion?
Yeah, I'll abstain from those. I wasn't here for that one.
Okay, yes, Selectman's Rep Sly Karazinski is abstaining because he was not here at that meeting. Any further discussion? Then all those in favor indicate by saying aye. All those opposed. Now we have the December 15th, 2022 minutes. Anybody have any comments on those minutes? And if not, a motion to accept the minutes as presented would be in order. Motion by Richard Lane to accept the minutes as presented. Is there a second? Seconded by Michael York. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye. All those opposed? Okay, and those are passed. Now, does anyone think that anything on tonight's agenda requires us to notify other towns? That would be our regional impact vote. And I don't see anything. If no one else sees anything, then a motion would be in order that we do not need the regional impact vote. Anyone care to make that motion?
I'll move. There's nothing on the agenda that requires a regional impact vote.
Okay, Michael York moves for that the planning board does not have to do a regional impact vote. Is there any further discussion? No, is there a second? You need a second on that one. Second by Richard Lane. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye. All those opposed? And that's accepted too. That brings us to the applications and public hearings, and the planning board number 22-021, that's a site plan review, and I just read through that. That's the Avanru site plan review, 74-unit multifamily development, and that's a continued deliberation, and from our December 15th, 2022 meeting. So, board members are in the middle. We're in the middle of deliberation. So we've heard plenty of testimony from both sides, actually, as to the job of the planning board. You know, what regulations we can abide by, what waivers we can grant, and all those types of things. So I've mentioned to the board before that the job of the planning board is not to stand in the way of development. The job of the planning board is to guide the development per the zoning ordinances. Because development is going to happen no matter what. It's inevitable. It's a result of private property ownership, which is one of the cornerstones of the country's founding. If you own a piece of property then you have the right to develop that property just as much as any other property owner has the right to develop. The process is kept somewhat fair by the zoning ordinances that the town passes. So the planning board has to abide by those zoning ordinances as well as the developer has to abide by the zoning ordinances. That's what makes it fair and that's what keeps it fair. So if the planning board finds an application and there's something in there that doesn't abide by the zoning ordinance or something like that, they can't just flatly deny that application just because of that. They've got to give the opportunity to the applicant to change that, to correct it somehow, and come in front of the board again and reapply, or not reapply, really, actually, just to resubmit their drawings for corrections, which we have done, actually, in this case, what we're doing here. We had sent them back to modify the roof design, and we had asked them to come back with a modified design, which they had. And they came back with those designs, which, as consensus of the board, were better than the designs that they had previously presented to us. And pretty much that's how the process is supposed to work. That's what we're supposed to be doing here. So to get back to our deliberation part of it, we had tabled this discussion to hear advice back from the town attorney as to whether or not we should reopen the public hearing to discuss possible assessments or property value assessments around the area. So everyone has probably read the response from the town attorney. And are there any comments on that? Does anyone agree, not agree, or how would that be? That's what we're deciding right now. Everybody, have you read it? Sly? Yes, okay. Ms. York, you've read it? Yep. You've read the town attorney, Brandon, and Richard, you've read it? Mr. Malone, you've read it? Okay. Any comments on it? Then hearing none, I would have to say that everyone agrees with the town attorney. Jane? I can state basically what the opinion of the council is, but, you know, the letter that they gave us is privileged to the planning board for, basically the letter stated that we shouldn't do it. Okay, so we'll leave it at that. And Jane, I miss you. You're okay, you read the letter. I just want to know if you saw the letter. The letter, I'm sorry. Okay, you saw it. So everyone saw it, and I'd have to say that no one objects to it since no one is bringing any objection to it. So that means we do not open up reopen the public hearing, and we can get on through the deliberations. So, Jane, go ahead.
Did you ask if we agreed with the town attorney's decision? Did you say that?
I will ask that if someone wants a motion that they agreed with it.
Did you ask that? That's what I was asking.
Oh, sorry, I didn't ask it. I was just going by, since no one had any objection to it, I was assuming that everyone agreed with it. And if no one, if someone doesn't agree with it, then they need to speak up and say why.
Well, for my part, I don't agree with it.
Okay.
Because the appraisals were taken from various parts of the country that do not really compare to the neighborhood we're talking about.
Just a second. We're discussing whether we should open up the public hearing to decide whether or not the planning board gets a separate appraisal, not necessarily the appraisal is given.
That's why I would support getting a separate appraisal.
Because you don't agree with the other one, so, but is that why you don't agree with the town attorney's advice not to do it? Okay.
Yes, to both.
Okay. Anyone else? All right, no one else, so. Yes, Mr. Lane.
I understand what the attorney is saying. Do I agree with it? No. I think that it's the responsibility of the board to explore all avenues for the town as elected officials of the town to make sure that we're not doing something that is going to bite us later.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
All right, thank you. So, is there a motion to reopen the public hearing? That is my question. And hearing none, we'll proceed to the deliberation. And where were we? We were listing the conditions of approval is what we were doing. And let me run down those conditions that we had done there. I have them from the meeting there. So we had conditions of approval, which would be, these would be administrative in nature, which would not require a compliance hearing. And that would be an FAA permit, the NHDES sewer connection permit, the NHDES shoreland permit, the NHDES alteration of terrain permit, a revised NHDOT access permit, Town of Swanzey sewer permit, access permit from the Swanzey Public Works Director, and approval from the airport manager. Those are administrative, so that means that the applicant would not have to come back for a compliance hearing for those matters. It could be done in office in the land use office when those permits came in, is what that means. Yes. I will. The last two was, I had Town of Swanzey sewer permit. Okay, you have that. Access permit from the Swanzey Public Works Director and approval from the airport manager. So on the list for the compliance hearing, these, they would have to come back for a compliance hearing. We have, let's see, we have the updated landscape plan, and that would be reflecting the required amount of trees on the east side of the property, larger landscape islands in the parking area, and landscaping along the south side adjacent to the two-story section of the proposed structure, which is in the rear. Then they would also need to bring in an updated drainage plan because they have changed that parking area, and an updated utilities plan because they plan to bring the utilities in a different spot due to changing the configuration of the access. Okay, so those are the conditions. So we can start there.
Please speak into the microphones.
Have to use your mic. He's asking about the swing radius of a fire truck into the driveway, and I believe the fire department had looked over that. Do you know, Sarah? Yes. They have looked over that, and they have agreed with, approved it, the new design. Can't get used to these mics here. So that's okay with the fire department. If it's okay with them, it's okay with the planning board, because they have final say on that. Are there other conditions that we're looking at?
Yeah, I'd like to discuss whether there's a concern out there about the project becoming something other than senior housing. I would like to discuss whether we could put a deed restriction making sure that the property could never be changed from a 62 and older senior housing. Deed restrictions are quite common and they're quite legal.
Okay, a deed restriction, restricting it to the 62 and older forever is what that would be. And basically, that is what they planned for anyway. They had submitted the plans for 62 and older residents. It was approved through the ZBA for 62 and older. And we had asked them about it as well, and they said, yes, it would remain 62 and older. So is there any discussion on board members on that proposal there as a condition?
My concern is if it gets sold, the property gets sold in the future. I know right now he doesn't have a plan to do that, but plans change down the road. And this would prohibit somebody coming in, purchasing it, and change it to what they want.
So are you submitting that as a condition? Okay. That would be under the administrative conditions, and that would be that there be a deed restriction. Restricting the age limit of the residents to be 62 and older, correct? Okay. Okay. Any other board members think of any other conditions that may be relevant here to this application? Microphone, somebody's on.
Do we have down that they have to come from compliance with finished plans?
Yes, we do. We named the landscape plan, the drainage plan, and the utilities plan. Those three have to be updated. That would be, let's see, oh, there was another, I don't know which one you're talking about, the revised parking plan, but that would be in the landscape as well. But there was also found by the land use office that when they reconfigured the entrance, the access, they, the parking was too close. Was it the parking? Yeah. Was it parking or was it the driveway was too close? Yeah, I thought it was parking spaces. Parking spaces was too close, within 10 feet of the property line, and they were apprised of that, and they said that is no problem to change, but that should be on one of those plans there for sure. So let's add that in, the revised parking plan. Okay. Any other? Yes. That's correct, yes.
Microphone, please, Ms. Johnson.
That wasn't Ms. Johnson, but
Hi, sorry.
that was our record keeper just asking me a question as to what was going in the record, and you heard the whole record, so you don't need to hear that one.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you have on there that we have to see?
Are you speaking to the mic? This
we
is.
have to see added landscaping to what we have seen on the plan to date?
Yeah, the landscape, and let me read that again. This is to clarify what the landscape plan, the updated landscape plan means, and that is, it's reflecting the required amount of trees on the east side of the property, larger landscape islands in the parking area, and landscaping along the south side adjacent to the two-story sections of the proposed structure. You know, yeah, okay. So that would be in that plan, have to be included in that plan. And we have it here. Okay, so any other conditions anyone can think of on this? And if not, are we done discussing it and ready for a motion? Jane, would you be willing to vote in the affirmative with all these conditions on this application? I'm not, there's no motion, so if you have objections to something, now's the time to say it.
You want me to be point blank honest with you?
Of course.
I think
You can't reach me from there.
I think this building is far too big for 2.5 acres in a community that it's going in. It's not an urban community. Actually, we have fewer urban communities in New Hampshire now than we did last week, from what I read. But it's a huge building on a small lot with no buffer area between it and the airport, and it simply is not in harmony, so to say. I don't like to use that word, but it doesn't compare to the rest of the neighborhood it's sitting in. So I just think it's in the wrong place at this time. It really is.
Okay, yep.
In my opinion, that's my opinion.
Your opinion, but again, the planning board has to be fair. The zoning ordinance applies to the planning board as well as it does to the applicant. I mean,
You
and
can be fair without my,
you can, okay. Mr. Karazinski, do you have any objection to a motion, if a motion were introduced to approve with those conditions that we're talking about?
The testimony that I've reviewed and listened to from the abutters and people in the neighborhood is in conflict with the appraisal that was given by the applicant. So I would have to weigh that carefully in the final deliberation as far as what would happen to their property values and their enjoyment of their properties.
Mm-hmm.
So I did note in the appraisal submitted that Boston was reflected, Richmond, I believe, Virginia probably, not New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And those areas have things like public transportation and kind of more developed than our rural New Hampshire and Swansea.
I agree. I read it. I read the whole thing, and most of it did not pertain to this area. How that is one of the criteria that the ZBA has jurisdiction to weigh in on their decision, which they did weigh in on it and approved it with that as a specific criteria. Planning board doesn't have that as a specific criteria. We have the harmony criteria of the neighborhood, but not specifically the valuation or the appraisals of the neighborhood there, property values. But thank you for your input. Mr. York.
Yeah, I agree with Jane and Sly, but again, I also agree with the chair that we cannot take that into consideration, and we have to abide by our zoning and our site regulations.
Thank you. Mr. Self?
Yeah, I agree with Michael. As much as people might not like it or think it's ugly, we have to uphold what the planning board rules and regulations are, and so I would vote for it.
Thank you. Mr. Lane?
I think from the start, this has been an ill-conceived project for the area. In speaking to a few real estate individuals, I get the impression that that would be a detrimental aspect to any listing that they would be trying to secure in that area. We've made some progress in the design and changing the roof lines, but it's still, in my opinion, something that is vastly larger than what should be used there. And we do have the ability, if we reopen the public hearing, to ask for an extension and to ask for an independent appraiser to come in and evaluate the area and what this project would do to the property values. So my feeling is that it's not in the best interest of the town or of the neighborhood. So I would vote against it.
Okay, thank you. Now, the extension you're referring to is the 65-day, extension to the 65-day clock that's running on the planning board after we open up the...
It would be a request of the applicant to grant the planning board an extension to research this further.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Malone?
Hold on, let me give you something to speak into.
Before I answer that, I have to find out whether or not I'm entitled to vote on this, because I was not here for the first part of that hearing, but although I was here for the second part, I have also reviewed both of the minutes.
Okay, and do you, after reviewing the minutes, do you feel that you're up to speed?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you. Then continue.
I would vote against this application.
Okay, thank you. So we've heard from all the board members. You haven't heard from me yet. And I would vote for the application because of the planning board's duty to abide by the zoning ordinance in the town of Swanzey. This particular building, yeah, it might not fit that residential area across the street, but it is in a zoning district, and it would fit the zoning district. You can't just deny just because you disagree with the zoning ordinance and density and so on and so forth. You have to go, in my opinion, have to go by the zoning ordinance and what is fair for the applicant and what is fair for the town. And like I had mentioned before, private property rights, if you own a piece of property, you have the right to develop it. You don't have any more right, you don't have any less right than anyone else that owns property in town. And as long as you go by the rules, it has to be fair. So that would be my opinion. So after that, I will call for, is there a motion that anyone wants to?
I'll move it to accept the application.
A motion by Michael York to accept the application with the conditions that we read prior. Okay, and is there a second? Yes. Seconded by Brandon Self. So let me read the conditions. This is a motion to approve the application with the following conditions. These would be administrative and would not require a compliance hearing. An FAA permit, the NHDES sewer connection permit, NHDES shoreland permit, NHDES alteration of terrain permit, revised NHDOT access permit, Town of Swansea sewer permit, access permit from the Swansea Public Works Director, approval from the airport manager, deed restriction for 62 and older. Now, these items here, for the compliance hearing, these conditions would require a compliance hearing. The applicant will have to come back, schedule a compliance hearing, and bring these items with them. That is an updated landscape plan, a drainage plan, utilities plan, and a revised parking plan. So those are conditions, and you agree with the conditions, Mr. York?
I do.
That's what you meant, Mr. Self, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Then all those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. So 1, 2, 3. All those not. Okay. All those in favor were 1, 2, 3, and all those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so the motion doesn't pass. So now what we have to do is decide how the motion can pass, or decide why it is denied and the grounds for denial, which have to be actual grounds for denial, not like that you don't like it there or something like that. They have to be actual grounds for denial. So, what's your pleasure? Someone who denied it, Jane, would you like to start off on that, or Mr. Karasinski?
I'll start off with it. I'm with Richard. I'd like to see the applicant asked if they would grant a 65-day extension to do a fair and independent appraisal so that we could decide if this is within the harmony of the neighborhood and what it would do to the surrounding neighborhood.
Okay. That would be ask the applicant for an extension. So.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
this is Susan Manchester on Zoom. I represent the applicant. The applicant has considered this possibility, and the applicant denies the request.
Thank you for that. Okay. Could you repeat your name, please?
Susan Manchester from Sheehan Finney.
Okay. Okay, so the applicant has already weighed in on this, figuring that we might do it. So, any other comments from deniers? Mr. Lang, what are the grounds, if you're going to make a motion, if you were to make a motion to deny it, what would those grounds be?
My thought process is to, as Mr. Krasinski, to ask for the extension and to do the independent appraisal. Whatever the return is, plus or minus, is actually irrelevant to a point. My point being, I wanted to have all avenues explored by the planning board before we made a final decision on it. And where the applicant has denied that application for an extension, it kind of puts us in a box. We really don't have any other alternative. And, you know, as far as our ability or our responsibility to explore all aspects for for the neighborhood or for the town, that is being denied us by the applicant.
Mr. Malone, would you like to comment on that?
I believe that the application is not in harmony with the surrounding neighborhood. It is also an over-intensification of land use, in my belief. And it just, it will ruin the character of the neighborhood and of the town.
Okay, so we're back to square one. So we need to find out what zoning ordinance or ordinance or regulations does this go against? Because those are grounds for denial. I haven't heard any grounds for denial from any of the board members yet. I mean, yeah, there are good reasons, good opinions of it, but not real grounds for denial. The applicant has already said that they do not want to extend, so that means that the planning board has to decide tonight, yes or no. Either yes with conditions or no with reasons for denial. And again, I'm sure the board members know you don't give a good reason for denial and it will be reversed. Simple as that. If the planning board has no grounds to deny the application, it'll be reversed. So let's hear some grounds for denial. Somebody must have some. Otherwise, we're just going to have to go round and round until we get a consensus one way or the other, yes or no.
I have a question.
Yes.
Because I don't remember when we talked about this and when I read it, what is it written in our rules, the number of residences per acre? And I know this is a multifamily, but we're putting 74 units on 2.5 acres of ground, and that just is out of my understanding.
Well, you're talking about density.
What?
You're talking about density.
Yes.
Of course, that's how that comes and is done in our zoning. And yes, if they were to do it today, they would not be able to get that many units on there. But because of the courts overturning the Zoning Board of Adjustment's first decision on this, they appealed and they get to go underneath the 2020 zoning, which allows that density, meaning it's our laws, it's some of the regulations that we've adopted that allow that. So again, it's an opinion, but it's not a reason.
Okay.
You know, it fits that, it fits the height, it fits the landscaping, they changed that. They have changed the roof to make it look a little bit better there, and in my opinion, it does look better there with that. And again, it may not fit aesthetically, but you can't only look at the residential residential units across the street. It's in a business zone, and you have to take into consideration buildings in the business zone, and not only that business zone over there. If it goes to someone else looking at the planning board's decision, they're going to look at the entire district, which means a business district everywhere in town, not only over there, but everywhere in town is a business district, and they will compare it with things there to see if it, if it's a good denial or not. So.
Okay, you know what? The only thing I can say, and this is not my opinion, but this is why I don't think I could vote for this, because I am an elected member of the planning board. The people of Swanzey have elected me, and that's who I represent here. I don't represent me. I don't like the looks of the building, and I certainly wouldn't want it in my neighborhood, and I'd fight like hell to keep it out of my neighborhood, and it probably wouldn't make any difference, just like these people. But I am here to represent the town of Swanzey that I care very much about. And I'd like to see things done in Swanzey that enhance its value, not something that is an enormous plop right in the middle of what we have. I don't know how to better say it. Maybe if I had time to think more about it, I would. But that's where I'm coming from. I can't vote for it.
No, I think you said it fine, Jane. It's a good approach to have, but the people of Swanzey also voted in the zoning regulations that this is going by, as well as the planning board discussed them and presented them to the voters.
Well,
so
maybe, but I cannot.
So how are we going to resolve this? opinions here. It's resolved with a motion. The motion, yes.
We are being asked, among other things, to approve a landscaping plan that we haven't seen. We have put in our recommendations for it, but we have not seen a landscaping plan that meets the satisfaction of this board.
And if it doesn't meet the satisfaction on the compliance hearing, then they don't move forward. That's it.
Well, I think, among other things, I believe that we should at least look at a landscaping plan. This case is going on long enough.
But we can't, because we've already closed the public hearing. We're done with that type of discussion. If we look at the landscape plan, then we have to have the applicant explain and have to have testimony from the public and that. We've already closed the public hearing. They know what we want. They're revising landscape plan for parking and parking islands. If that does not fit what it's supposed to do, not fit the regulations, then, like I just said, they do not move forward with the project. That's what a compliance hearing is all about.
I am still opposed to the application.
And any good reason why. I need a good reason why. If we're going to vote against it, we need a good reason why.
We don't have an approved landscaping plan.
That is not a good reason why, because that's one of the conditions that we can present to them in a motion. I mean,
They submit a landscaping plan that is unsatisfactory. What happens then? Do they have an opportunity to come in with yet another landscaping plan?
we could deny the application if they refuse to submit a landscaping plan, but they have not refused to submit a landscaping plan.
But we haven't seen it yet, and we don't know if it meets our criteria.
One way to find out is to approve it with that as a condition, and if it doesn't move forward.
Well, I say that the thing comes to an end tonight.
And how would that be? I'm looking for reasons. That's what I'm doing, looking for good reasons.
We don't have we don't have a landscaping plan to look at, and that is part and parcel of the approval process.
Okay, anybody else? I get it, I understand it, but we've got to look at the whole picture. Anybody else want to weigh in on anything here? If not, is there another motion in order? Anybody want to make a motion one way or the other? And if not, we continue deliberating. It meets the criteria of the zoning. The planning board's job is to uphold that zoning. It's fair to us and it's fair to the developer to abide by those zoning regulations or laws, if you want to put it that way, either way. And like I said earlier also, that's what makes it fair. The applicant has to abide by those same rules, and we have to abide by them as well. If there's something in there, that it doesn't fit, and I know a lot of you are talking about the appraisals, and again, that's not a planning board criteria, the appraisal. It's a zoning board of adjustment criteria. And they have already weighed in on that, they've already passed as a result of that. So you deny the application and use that as a reason, the court's just going to overturn it because the ZBA already discussed that and had one. The time to discuss all that was during the ZBA for that board, not this board. Go ahead. We have another mic.
Are we going to bow to the threat of a lawsuit? I say no.
Listen, we are not, they are not threatening us. Nobody's threatening us. Nobody's threatened the board with a lawsuit at all. I have brought up on different occasions about the possibility of a lawsuit. I'm looking at it objectively and seeing that if I were the applicant or even an attorney or their attorney, something like that, it'd be quite clear to see where you'd go from here if it's denied because of that. Mr. Lane.
Just, my question is, why is it that the applicant is denying the extension? What are they afraid of? I'm just putting that out because
it's their right to deny the extension.
Agreed, but they are trying to, or maybe they're not trying to, incorporate something into a neighborhood and have the neighborhood join with them in approving the project. And if we were allowed the extension to explore whether or not this project is going to be detrimental to the neighborhood financially, I would think that, you know, financially or not financially, that the applicant would, grant that extension just to take that concern or that cloud away from the project.
Well,
And again, it is within our purview to ask for that.
the applicant, in my opinion, is doing exactly what I would do if I were the applicant. I would know that the planning board did not have grounds really to deny my project. I mean, grounds out of the zoning or anything like that, that they would probably deny it on what we were discussing and what we tabled the matter for as far as the assessment goes. We tabled it at the last meeting to discuss that. They knew that was our plan. They knew we wanted to reopen the public hearing for that. If I were them, my strategy would be not to grant the extension and to force the planning board to deny them on, for want of a better word, bogus grounds, and then just take them to court and win right there and be done with it and be gone. And, sorry, no, I'm sorry. I'm just saying that that's what I would do if I were the applicant, and I would realize, and I'm sure that they have consulted their legal attorney as well to see if the planning board actually can deny the application because of the property values, when it actually has been discussed and voted on by the zoning board of adjustment prior to the planning board. But again, that's an opinion. That's what happened here. So, Sly, do you want to weigh in on anything? You have anything to add? No. Well, we're going to deliberate here until we get a motion one way or the other. And you didn't make a motion for the 9 o'clock clause, so we could be here till midnight. So. Well, that's true too. I live close by. We're in the middle of a deliberation. You cannot do that. Nope. Yeah, Mr. Malone.
I believe that we did have a motion and we did have a vote.
Okay, what was the motion? Oh, the motion, you're talking about the motion to approve with conditions.
Yes, and that motion was denied.
Yes, that motion failed.
Why are we now having a second motion
Okay.
on the same item?
I see, I get you there.
We have denied the application.
No, we haven't.
Yes, we did.
The motion failed. The motion to approve failed. If the motion to approve fails, you have to have a motion to deny in order to deny.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we deny this application.
Okay, we have a motion from Mr. Malone to deny the application on any specific grounds you can
The
come up with.
ones previously stated by all the members of the board who were opposed to it.
And would you repeat those, please?
I didn't take notes on it.
You must remember why you're denying the.
It's certainly an over-intensification of land use, in my opinion. I can't speak for other members of the board. It is an inappropriate application, especially considering the recent events at the airport where there was a tragic plane crash. And I don't think that it fits in the character of the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion to deny for the reasons you just heard. Is there a second for that motion? Seconded by Jane Johnson. Is there any further discussion? That discussion, again, would just come from me, just saying that none of those grounds are actual grounds to deny the application. We can do it, obviously, and you don't like me saying it, you don't like hearing it over and over and over again about the zoning ordinance, but I'm going to say it over and over again, because that is what the planning board does. We have to abide by them, like it or not.
We have an attorney who will defend our position.
We have an attorney. We'll put it that way. I don't know how far they get, but again.
My position is not to second guess the judge.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor and a second. No further discussion?
I would just like to add that the state law is that you have to give specific findings of fact to deny an application, and those specific finding of fact need to be grounded in our regulations. our zoning ordinance and our site plan review. So if this is going to be denied and not immediately appealed and overturned by the court of law, there needs to be something grounded in our regulations.
Thank you. So, again, it's been what we've been discussing, what I've been saying. We need an actual reason, if there is one,
Mr.
that
Chairman,
backs up your position. Go
I
ahead.
call for a vote on my motion.
And that is your right. So we have a motion on the floor, a seconded by Jane Johnson, motion by Steve Malone. Is there any further discussion? And all those in favor of the motion to deny, say aye.
Aye.
And that is 1, 2, 3, 4. All those opposed, and that would be me. 2, 1, 2, 3. So the motion does carry. It's 3 to 4. So the application is denied. All right, so. Okay, that brings us to our second agenda item, and this is a planning board. Yeah, I'll give a brief recess for people who want to leave, and those guys are setting up. Take your time, they got to set it up. You've got plenty of time. I'll just call it back to when it comes back. I didn't give a specific. Yes, go ahead.
Yep.
That's green, it's live.
Yep.
Okay, all right, I think we're ready to reconvene the meeting. And our next application up is a planning board number 22-023. This is a continued public hearing from 12/8/22, and that's Brickstone Land Use Consultants LLC requests a site plan review on behalf of Swanzey Lake Campground LLC to construct a maintenance building, bathhouse, 36 full-service campsites, and associated site improvements on undeveloped land located on East Shore Road. And the subject property is shown at tax map 45, lot 22-3 in the rural agricultural district. And Mr. Fippard, would you like to do the presentation?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jim Fippard. I'm with Brickstone Land Use Consultants, and I'm here representing the Swanzey Lake Campground LLC. They are the owners of the property on East Shore Road that is displayed on the screen before you. There are 2 tracts of land that are in use. This larger area here is just over 18 acres in size, and this is the existing campground at the site today. There are 108 campsites in this location. They are also the owners of these 2 parcels of land located to the north of the existing campground. This proposal is to utilize this 12-acre area and add an additional 36 campsites to the campground operation. We would propose to merge the 2 properties to form a single lot just over 30 acres in size. And then we would extend utilities and the camping and the access into the 12-acre area as shown on this plan. The existing facilities, most of the sites, but not all of the sites in the existing campground have sewer and water service and electrical service, cable television service. So we are proposing to extend all those utilities partially from this campground into the new camping area on this site. We'll also be adding a new septic system, which will be located roughly here where I have the pointer shown. And I want to go to an additional plan sheet. This is it, the only sheet, Ian? Okay. Okay. I can work from this if I have to. You did lie.
Yeah, do we say next to you, do you want to scroll it or do you want to try?
I can scroll if I have to. I can use the up and down arrows, right? All right. So this is a copy of our proposed plan. This is focused on the 12.2 acre area that's north of the existing campground. The existing campsites are here at the bottom of the page. Access to this area for the new campsites will come from the existing access driveways on the existing campground. So we would build a new roadway from that point into the 12-acre site and configure it as you see here today. This roadway would be 20 feet in width. That was requested by the fire chief, and we will comply with that. It'll be a gravel road, and it will essentially follow the existing terrain that's there today. It's pretty level in this area where you see the laser. As you get into the site, though, you can see the contour lines crossing the property here. This portion of the roadway at this location gets as steep as 10%, which exceeds the 5% grade recommended in your regulations. And I'm requesting a waiver from the Public Works Director or the road agent to allow that steeper grade in this location. This is a seasonal use of the property. It's not year-round. They're in operation from May 1st until October 31st every year. So there is no winter passage through this area. So the gravel road, even though it's a little bit steeper than your 5% allowed in the regulations, should still be safe and easily manageable for cars and vehicles and campers. The roadway, just like in the existing campground, it's all one-way road. It's one-way travel, and that makes it safer and easier to control access into the campsite. So it would be one way in at this location, all the way to here, one way going up the hill, one way around the loop, one-way coming down here, and then you enter back into the exiting lanes into the existing campground. So there's no new curb cut that we're proposing on East Shore Road, which will be located to the left of this plan. We're proposing 36 campsites. As you can see, they are pretty well spread. There's existing trees between all of the campsites, and that's their intent for this property, is to continue the pattern they've established in the old campground, the existing campground. They're going to maintain as many of the trees as possible. We don't want to go in and clear cut. We want to preserve the trees. We want it to be a shaded, tree-lined camping area, which has been very well received, and it's popular. They're already 70% rented, I understand, for next year in the existing campground, not into the new sites. So this campground is enjoyed by many. We recognize the terrain out here. It slopes. This is the higher portion of the property, and this slopes downhill to the southeast and the southwest. In the southwest corner of the property, there's an existing wetland that won't be disturbed. We're not proposing to alter any wetlands on the site. There's also an existing wetland area on the adjacent lot to the west, which is also owned by Swanzey Lake Campground. We're not proposing any impacts to any of the wetlands on either of the properties. Drainage will be directed down the site through shallow swales and into stormwater collection areas, one located here at the southwest corner of the site, and a second located here at the southeast corner of the site. These stormwater areas are sized for a 25-year design storm. That's just under 5 inches of rain in a 24-hour period, which is a standard for design. And the 25-year design storm is completely contained within the proposed stormwater areas and storage swales. So there's no increase in runoff leaving the site. We are proposing to add a new bathhouse on the property. So where the cursor is pointing, that's the 20 by 20 foot structure that would have both men's and women's facilities for showers and for restroom facilities. This would be obviously connected to the new sewer system that we'd be building on the property. The new leach field would be located just to the right of that, in this area where I'm pointing. This property line will be the property line that will be extinguished as we merge the properties. So all of this area is one contiguous lot. We also are proposing a new maintenance building to be built on the property. This would be 24 feet wide and 75 feet long. There would be overhead doors facing south. There would be no windows or doors or openings facing north, east, or west in this building. There will be a small office area in this building for use by the employees who work at the facility. There'll be a restroom there. This will be connected, obviously, to the electrical supply, the water supply, and sewer supply. And again, all of that is collected on site. So we hired Dale Freihofer, a local septic system designer and consultant. He came to the site, did the test pits, verified that the site can support the wastewater that would be generated by 36 new campsites. We sized the facility based on actual data that was collected from the 108 campsites that are existing. Most of these campsites are on a water supply. The well is located on the campground property on the other side of East Shore Road. It's an excellent well. 20 gallons per minute is the tested capacity. It's registered with the state of New Hampshire as a transient community well, as it has to be because it's serving more than 24 people who don't live here. So this meets the state classification. It's tested annually for potability. And there's a standard list of elements that they're required to test for. And they obviously pass those tests because the test results allow the state to approve its continued operation. The capacity of that well, we looked at actual usage, metered usage from the well for 5 years. And after a 5-year period, all of that data showed that the average daily usage of the water supply is 10 gallons per day per campsite. And that's much lower. If you look at the state guidelines on how you design septic for a camping area, they recommend 60 gallons per day. And actual usage, though, is the 10 gallons per day that they've averaged over that 5-year period. So the state recognizes that, and they allow us to design our septic system based on the metered usage, because they've proven that's the average for this area. The electric supply will come from the existing campground, and that's being designed by Eversource. It'll be underground electric that'll be extended in, and that's on our utility page. Maybe I can get to. This is our utility plan, and it's hard to see the colors on the screen, but on the smaller version, it's much easier to see. The sewer lines are these red lines that run right down the middle of the roadways, and they parallel each other, and they come down to a small pump station located at this location, and then it's pumped to the new leach field that will be constructed here. So this will be a brand new leach field to be constructed, and it will service the 36 sites that we're proposing here, plus the maintenance building and the bathhouse. So that's what it's sized for, and there's a letter there from Dale Fryhoff certifying that the site can support that usage. It meets the nitrogen loading, nitrate loading requirements that we have to comply with from the state. The electric supply will come from the existing campground. It's an underground service that runs essentially behind each of the camp areas, and it's fed into the campsites, and individual pedestals are provided. It's a 50 amp service at each campsite, and campers can pull in and plug into those services if they choose to use it. Not everybody does, but it is available to each of the campsites. And also the water supply it's a plastic CTS pipe. CTS means copper tubing size, if you wondered. And it's because it's a seasonal use from May to October, these are just laid on the surface of the ground. And they go underground through a pipe under the travelways, and then they run in the areas behind the campsites with individual service lines stubbed into each site. And that's brought up to a pedestal as well with a spigot, so they can tie into that and hook up their campers if they choose to use it. But again, not everybody does. The electric also includes a cable line. Camping these days, you're not really roughing it anymore. Most of them require access to cable television, and that's provided at each of the campsites as well. Traffic, I took a look at traffic. In 2019, the town hired Southwest Region Planning to come in and do traffic counts in different roads throughout the town. East Shore Road was one of them. If you remember back at that time, we were in front of the zoning board asking for a special exception. Traffic was one of the issues, and I think the town recognized it was a convenient time to go out and get the actual data, and the town did that. So that traffic count was done in August of 2019. So it was during the season when people are at the lake, the campground was in full operation. And the campground is usually fully occupied throughout the summer on weekends. And during the week, there's less usage, as you'd expect, because people work. But they do have, regular usage in that area. So they showed in 2019, after a 2-week traffic count, the average counts were about 301 vehicles per day, which is very low traffic in the traffic world. Looking at the Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Manual under the category of Campground Recreational Vehicle Park, which is Land Use Code 416, for the record, the 36 additional campsites are expected to add about 9 vehicle trips during the morning peak hour and as many as 15 vehicle trips during the PM peak hour. Again, very low numbers, and 9 trips in an hour, you can do the math, it's not a lot of traffic. So I don't expect any problems to result from increases in traffic from 36 additional sites. The lighting that we're proposing, I did provide a lighting plan, this is it. I'll start with the maintenance building, which is up at the top of the page. We're calling for 2 wall-mounted lights 8 feet above the ground that would be full cutoff LED fixtures. So these are 20-watt fixtures, very low light levels, and the plan shows the footprint of the light cast on the ground. The lights would only be on the south side of the building, nothing facing the residential area to the north, the east, or the west. The average light levels are obviously very low, and it's concentrated in these areas immediately adjacent to the building. At the bathhouse, we're adding 1 wall-mounted fixture. Again, mounted 8 feet off the ground. This is a 15-watt LED fixture. I included cut sheets in the application, so the board has that information if you want more details on it. Again, it's a full cutoff LED fixture, so they're not causing light pollution. And at such low wattage, you get a very small footprint. It keeps the area very dark and won't interfere with night sky. I already covered utilities. Snow storage, there's really no need for snow storage as we're not operating in the winter months. This property is not in the floodplain. I am proposing no additional landscaping because we're in a forested site. We're going to preserve most of the forested trees. You can see our intent on this plan. Now here's an individual campsite and you can see the tree line around it. So we're carving out a small enough area to park in, essentially, for a camper and a car, and that's it. We're leaving the rest of the trees, we're leaving the area as natural as possible. As I said, I identified the wetland areas. They're located to the left off the site and to the right down in this area. We're not proposing any impacts to the existing wetland on the property. These are building elevations that we submitted. We're looking at board and batten, wood frame construction, and you can see overhead doors on the south wall of the maintenance building and a single passage door. And the other walls are solid wood, board and batten construction, asphalt shingle roof. On the bathhouse, we have 2 doors for men's access and a women's access, and again, the board and batten. So it's a brown color finish stain that we'll put on it, so we think it fits in very well for the campground location. I did request waivers, and that's in the 3rd page of the application narrative. Waivers from providing a landscape plan because we're keeping this a forested site. A waiver from providing easements and covenants because there are none that run with the property. And I'm requesting a waiver from the 5% slope restriction on the access road leading into that one side of the site where we get as steep as 10%. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
The sites, how are you grading those off? They're going to be leveled, is that correct? Are they going to have little retaining walls there or something, or are you going to do that?
No.
Oh, sorry, I'm using the microphone here.
The sites can accommodate up to 2 feet of slope. They don't have to be perfectly flat.
They don't? Oh.
So we're proposing to work with the grade as much as possible. I mean, if you look closely at the plan, and it's hard to see on this scale, there's a little bit of regrading around this area, and several of the sites do have a little bit of regrading in order to get up to that 2%, 2-foot drop across that site area. So we're not manipulating too much of the land. We're
Not carving
trying
out much, then, I guess, no retaining wall. I was
to-
asking,
No,
I didn't
no
see any walls
retaining
on there.
walls, no. We're basically working with the material that's there, bringing in gravel where we need it to make a stable area to site the camper.
And the drainage swales that you referred to about draining the property, are those something you're going to add into that? You know, where are they going to be?
Yeah, they're located in different locations. There's a drainage swale located here, that will be, it'll be dug by hand or with a ditch witch. We're not gonna drive in with a machine to get between the trees. We're gonna make it work through that area. The terrain is already sloping, so all we're doing is trying to collect it into an area where we can control it. We're also calling for a swale in this area. You can see the pointed contour lines. So the point in the contour line always points upgrade. So you can tell where the high point is and it's sloping down. And these are directed directly into these stormwater collection areas. So runoff coming from this area is going in this direction. We're intercepting it before it can leave the property, directing it down into this stormwater collection area. We're doing the same thing here, where any runoff from these areas are collected and directed down into the stormwater collection areas.
Would you go to sheet 2 for a second? Sheet 2, I think it's, I don't know if I don't see what I'm looking for on that one right there. I'm looking on sheet 2. That's just your proposed plan sheet. I just had a question by number 18. That small, is that, what is that down to the bottom of number 18? You see where I mean? It's number 18 lot, I guess you'd call it, number 18 station. It's to the right-hand side.
Is this it?
No, over 1, no, over 2. Right about there.
Okay.
Do you see there's a small, by the,
Yes, this is, we put a culvert under the driveway.
okay,
So that's a collection area.
that's for the drainage,
Swale
correct?
comes down, right, and it's allowed to collect in that area, pass through the culvert, eventually into the pond.
It looked like that's what that was, but I wasn't really sure, thanks.
Yeah, it's,
Okay. Board members, any questions for the applicant? Yes, Mr. Malone?
What is will the road be plowed during the winter time because you are building 2 wooden structures, and I'm concerned about that for fire access?
the fire chief didn't raise a concern with it. We do have an access road. This is the existing gravel driveway into the property from East Shore Road. Our intent is to gate that off so it's not open to the public. It'll be gated emergency access. He's requested that we widen the roadway to 20 feet. I know their intent is not to plow the road. They usually head south for the winter. They're closed. And unless it's a requirement from the fire chief and the board, then we would have to get it plowed and maintained. I mean, if they have to do that, they would hire someone locally to come in after a storm event, unlock the gate, plow it out to the buildings.
The property is going to be vacant during the snow season,
Yes.
and vandals and idiot kids concern me with wooden structures and vacant property.
Yeah, I understand your concern. They haven't had a lot of trouble with vandalism. There are campers. Several of them are stored there over the winter. They rent their space year-round, and they lock up the camper and leave it. But they haven't had break-ins and or fires started or vandalism of the individual campers. And obviously, they're hoping that that is the trend that'll continue. But if the board feels it's too dangerous not to have it plowed and maintained, then they can arrange to hire somebody to keep it plowed in the winter.
Okay.
I don't know if we're going to get snow that's plowable in the winter anymore anyway, but.
Maybe not. Okay, at this point, the answer is no. Okay.
Right,
Thank
their
you.
intent is not to unless it's required.
So the dredge and fill permit, the site-specific permit that was issued, 2006, I think it was that used? Was that used for that? The access-
No,
it was
that
the
was
access road.
used by the previous lot owner of this lot.
That's what I meant, but
They
that's,
put in
it's the same permit, correct? I was just
Yes,
wondering
they
if it
put
was
in
ever
a
used or
culvert
not.
that's in place. That
Okay,
was
it's
used.
there, all right.
They're there.
Yeah, thank you.
In fact, the fire chief looked at it. We didn't want to apply for a wetland permit to extend the length of the culvert, and because that's what would be required. And the permit that was issued back then specifically prohibited any additional impact.
Yeah,
So the fire chief agreed we could leave it alone. We'll narrow the road at the crossing because it is, I think, 14 feet wide.
that would be right over here, isn't it, on your plan?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. But my understanding is he signed off.
He's okay, all right, that's, I was wondering about that, thanks.
Excuse me, did I hear you correctly saying that you're going to be putting in a new leach field?
Yes.
Okay, then number 20 would become applicable, as far as I'm concerned, on the submission checklist.
That has to dealing with existing systems, and they're putting a new one in. They have an existing system over here, but this is the site plan we're looking at now.
Right.
And this is a new system, and they, okay, yeah, but they, in our packet, also, the designer stipulates that it can handle that amount of actually a lot more than they're proposing to put into it, but it stipulates that they can. I'm never going to get used to these microphones. Any other members of the board have questions? No? Okay, I'll open it up to members of the public for questions.
One more.
Yeah, one more.
On the emergency access, you said you're putting in a gate.
Yes.
Is that going to be something that's going to be controlled, or that the fire department would have access?
Yeah, we'll have a
lock it?
Knox box, and the fire department has access to every Knox box.
All right,
You
thank you.
put a key inside, and with the key, you open the lock on the gate, or else they just cut it with bolt cutters and drive right through.
All right, I'm going to open it up to comments from the public. Butters first, if you please, and anyone else who has a comment on it.
I'm a little shorter, sorry. Yes. Hi, members of the planning board and those in attendance. My name is Jana Blake, and my address is 111 East Shore Road. I am map 45, lot 22-4, and I am the closest impacted abutter to this development. I chose to build my house on my site in 2003, and I bought the property off my father and proceeded to build a property to the north of where the maintenance building is shown on this map. I'm a single mom. I work 3 jobs. I put my whole life savings into this building, in maintaining my home and my property. I'm rightfully concerned for many factors that having 36 campsites with all their families, friends, animals within such close proximity to my home will impact my quality of life. Loss of privacy is a major concern, as my closest neighbor's house is currently 724 feet from my house. It's through the woods, as the crow flies. The new proposed campground expansion will now begin 150 feet from my home. That is a significant difference. With little to no screening between, due to the nature of my property and where my driveway resides on my property. And again, It had to do with the way of the land and the grade. So I was forced to build my driveway a certain way to the closest right-hand side, which is closest to this development. When I built my home, I was never expecting a commercial business to be operating within 150 feet of my home. The land here and land surrounding is rural agricultural. This expansion will fully negate this privacy buffer and my quality of life. Obviously, with camping, which, by the way, I actually love to camp. I definitely am all about camping, but I'm not about it being 150 feet from my home. There's smoke, there's barking dogs, there's outdoor TVs, which Mr. Fipper did discuss about cable. All these campers that are going to be there are going to be the higher end campers, which is what they discussed in the zoning board meeting. These will have outdoor TVs. This will be definitely noise in my vicinity. Back on December 17th, 2018, which, by the way, is 4 years ago, original submission was made to the ZBA. It was a very tumultuous series of meetings, with many concerned citizens showing up at each meeting explaining their views against that expansion. Many of those same members are here today. During that particular ZBA meeting, Mr. Fipper continuously tried to paint a picture that Jill and Bill were longstanding residents and that they would retire owning the property. Page 2, paragraph 1, as highlighted in the document I just passed out. In page 5, paragraph 6. This, however, is not the case. Ownership can change in the blink of an eye, and how those new owners will operate this campground is not guaranteed. In spite of the fact that the campground did not sell this first time, which if you turn to the next page, is a listing that happened after Mr. Fippard tried to explain that, oh, these are longstanding residents, they're going to retire there. The campground did go up for sale in 2021. Even though that campground did not sell, there's just no saying that it's not going to sell in the future, and who the new owners will be and how they will operate that campground. The result of those ZBA meetings was a very narrow margin between approving or denying the approval of this special exception. 2 said yes. They said it would devalue my property. 3 said no, that it would not devalue my property. As part of the ZBA meetings, I requested a site walk be done. This was carried out. However, during the site view done on February 3rd, only one member in attendance walked out to the property and looked from my vantage point. I specifically asked that all members on that site walk view from my vantage point as well to make a fair decision. One ZBA member who did view from my vantage point was one of the ones that said, yes, it would devalue my property. Another factor that would have significant impact on the ZBA's decision was real estate devaluing impacts. My home, should this expansion be approved by the planning board, would likely become unsellable, or at least not at a value at its current state, and due to the level of privacy that would be lost. And I do apologize for those in attendance. I didn't realize that I could have put these on a computer and put them up here for you all to see. As you can see from the documents just handed out, a very well-known local real estate agent, Robin Smith, actually had a conversation with me, and I was discussing this situation. Unfortunately, I did not become aware of this fact, and that there was an example of a home in Winchester abutting Forest Lake Campground that became unsellable due to the fact that it was abutting the campground. This property, as discussed, was very reputable, again, agent Robin Smith. This listing never sold. The listing expired. To this day, that property has not sold. They even tried to put in, this keeps cutting out on me, is that okay? Okay. They put up a fence for privacy barrier, and it still was unsellable. Nobody wanted to buy a house directly abutting a campground. I'd like to read the letter. Dear Jan, it was nice to speak with you and share with you my concerns regarding the expansion of the Swanzey Lake Campground. You have legitimate concerns. I have been selling real estate for 20 years in Cheshire County, and I do have a great sense of what affects property, as well as buyers or sellers. In my professional opinion, the expansion of the campground will negatively impact the saleability of your home. I wanted to share with you firsthand what happened to a recent listing that I had and the consistent feedback. In August of 2017, the property known as 17 Town Beach Road, Winchester, best beachfront on the entire lake, was put on the market and listed, and the listing expired November 7, 2018. I was a listing agent for the property for the majority of the listing period. I also had accompany showings. Therefore, I was privy to the feedback firsthand. This property was located next door to the campground. The consistent feedback was, love the house, but the campground, the noise level, the late nights, fires, music, outdoor TVs, dogs that are chained and left to campsites, left to bark. I must have shown this property at least 35 times with no offers. Reason being, the campground and the proximity. I also asked my sellers to install a fence, so that would make a definitive separation, and they eagerly did it, and still it did not help. The property still has not sold. I received this letter in 2020. If you have any further questions or need information, I'm happy to assist you. Again, that is Robin Smith. Additionally, I spoke with Greg Johnson, and his letter was just an email back to me. He quickly had a review, he had a chance to quickly review the campground issue. Getting right to the point, there definitely would be an impact on surrounding property values. The board more or less supported this when the vote was 3-2. Bill Hutwicker, who himself is a real estate agent, voted yes, it would, and then he thought it would have an impact on property values. The tough part would be to determine to what extent. Personally, I would not want to be within hearing distance or, as we mentioned on the phone, people wandering on my property. Unfortunately, that's a tough case to prove, but property value would make a clearer case in my mind. I believe that had I had this information available to me at the zoning board meeting, this planning board meeting would be a moot point. Unfortunately, I did not have it at that time. I did request a rehearing, but that was denied. The disturbing fact was that one of the board members, Jane Scantz, during the March 18, 2019 ZBA meeting, actually stated in deliberation for the rehearing that she wished that some of the information that were brought up at the rehearing would have been shared during the previous meetings. Obviously, I did not have it at that time. She even verbalized that it would have changed her decision at the February meeting to approve the special exception. This was not captured in the meeting minutes, but there were others in attendance that heard this statement. I am unsure if there's recordings, but at that time we did not have video prior to COVID.
pretty thick. On the first image, actually relates to the initial image that was up here. I don't know if we can. So the plan map to scale that was submitted, it's only showing a 40-foot buffer from the property line of 4522-4, which is my property. Whereas the plan doc submitted states an approximate 80-foot buffer to the north of the maintenance building, subset of the landscaping, screening, and exterior lighting section, with most recent submission to the planning board. And if you look at those pictures, you'll see, let me go to the next one here. So the second picture is showing the 150 feet from my house and how close that really is. And due to the lay of the land, again, as stated, my driveway is on the far right hand of the property. So 150 feet from my house, per their map scale, pretty much just puts it on the border of my woods. In the third page, you'll see the picture of my closest neighbor, which is 724 feet from my house. My driveway, again, is a quarter-mile long. I live out in the middle of the woods with nothing else around me. My views are of Honey Hill, of the surrounding mountains. It's a beautiful view, and I love where I live. If you look at the fourth image, you'll see the existing campground. You see the image of my driveway leading up to the house. If you look to the lower right corner, in this vicinity here, this is what the campground looks like. So all of this is going to be right here in my yard. On this image here, this is the view from the front of my house. This image here is the view of Honey Hill. Honey Hill sits right here. The campground's going to be right here in my property, in my view. And then this image will become my new view. So again, the original submission was a 250-foot proposal to the ZBA. The original submission was a 100-foot buffer from the property line and a 250-foot from the corner of my house with no maintenance building. Obviously, a maintenance building is going to bring its own sounds, its own smells. You're going to hear generators running, you're going to hear diesel trucks, you're going to hear tractors. All of that is going to be right directly next to my house. Per their new submission, this has been reduced to 150 feet.
And in particular, in their submission, they're asking for the fact that they don't want any landscaping, screening, exterior lighting. They don't want that to be part of it. They want to exclude that. Obviously, there's an issue here. Just because their little picture shows it looks like trees and all that, it's not. It is open directly. Just due to the nature of the property and due to the nature of the lot lines. So, item C, landscaping, screening, exterior lighting. The applicant seeks a waiver of the required landscape plan. No landscaping is proposed, an approximately 100-foot buffer of existing scrub and trees, which per those pictures you can obviously does not exist. This will be maintained between the campsite and the property line to the north, the nearest neighbor. Approximately 80 feet of existing scrub and tree buffer will be maintained north of the proposed maintenance building. That doesn't hold true with what they submitted. So again, if you look at the last picture in the picture packet that I handed out, that will become my new view. My current view of pristine wilderness and wildlife that inhabits the area will be no more. Currently, I have bear, deer, turkeys, bobcats, moose, always around. Whenever I'm looking out my window, they're walking across the bank. I have so many pictures of this wildlife, and that will be no more with that many people next to me. I will lose this valuable gift from God with that increased occupancy. And the noise level that will come along with it, in addition to the 36 campsites, their family, friends, animals, all of it. Another area of concern is the water supply in the sewage disposal system. Per their submission, both buildings in each of the 36 proposed campsites will be served by a private water and septic. A new septic system is proposed on the east side. Obviously, we've heard them submit that's what they're going to do. They're going to put in this new septic system. But what about the existing septic system? The existing septic system is aging. It's old. It's not being updated. There's also issues with the well. The current well will be used significantly more with full camper hookups versus tent sites, which they are not proposing tent sites. They are proposing full sites, full hookups. Showers, toilet use, cleaning dishes, etc. I can actually talk from personal experience. I lived in a camper for 2 years. I know exactly what it entails. And it's a lot of water usage. Some of the campers actually have washer and dryers and all of that too, especially nowadays. I mean, they have a lot more going for them, for sure. I know personally, my hot water tank was 5 gallons. 5 gallons I went through in a shower, let me tell you what, and you were shutting off the water and turning it on and getting the soap in your hair and getting it out. So you're going to use a lot more than, you know, what they're proposing for water per day, obviously. This is going to have adverse impacts on my aquifer. We're on the same. Currently, during the dry summer months, I see a significant decrease in my water. I actually get sediment buildup in my screens, in my washing machine, and I have to remove all of those and clean them out. See, twice a year. So this is not something that is just on a whim. This is a real deal thing. I actually had to just replace the one in the washing machine 3 months ago. I want to go back to the sewer though, because obviously I have a pretty big concern with that. If you think about the fact that They're putting in this new septic system for the 36 new campsites up there. That's great. That's awesome. You know what it's not going to do? It's not going to upgrade where they're going to spend all their time, which is going to be down by the lake at the old septic, at the old system that has issues. I actually have eyewitnesses that saw Stone Septic pumping twice a week when it was brought up at zoning board that there was septic issues. Stone Septic was actually going there and pumping those tanks. So somebody's not telling the truth here. I don't know who it is, but it's obviously a major concern. Additionally, when Pilgrim Pines asked for their expansion on their campsites, they were required to upgrade their entire system. Not just the new, but their entire system. So I think that that needs to be given some serious thought. I would actually like to go back to a previous document, and that is the one with the campground listing. Which for some reason I seem to be missing. I do apologize. Can I borrow yours for a moment? I do apologize to everyone. Okay. Which one was it in? I can't find it, I'm sorry. Sorry about that, everyone. On their campground listing, I'd like to ask the planning board, obviously they could state that there's 108 campsites with more land for expansion. That's not against the law to state that fact. What I'd like to know is, why does it say the expansion lot with permitting in place? As far as I know, there's no permitting in place for this expansion, so why would they even list it on their listing?
They can state that too if they want to, but it doesn't mean it's true.
Okay, you're right about that, but false. There was not permitting in place. All right, I have just handed out Appendix A, which is from the master plan. These are all recreational opportunities that Swanzey residents enjoy. We have bird watching, fishing, hiking, running, canoe, kayak, boating, town beaches, and Swanzey Lake Summer Camp. All of these items are the highest levels, and they take place at the lake and surrounding areas. This is very important to our community. This is in your master plan, and this proves it. Give me mine. What I've just handed out is a source water protection plan for Swanzey, New Hampshire. Again, this is in the master plan. Rural Agricultural District. The Rural Agricultural District allows for residential and agricultural uses, including forestry, low-density residential recreation, open space, and water supply protection. Shoreland Protection District. The Shoreland Protection Overlay District includes properties abutting protected shoreline, including Ash Willet River, South Branch River, Ash Swamp Brook, Martin Brook, Ash Willet River Dam, Swanzey Lake, and Wilson Pond. This district stipulates special requirements for properties abutting these water bodies. Swanzey Lake Campground falls within both of those. Adding 36 campsites with family members, guests, and pets could possibly injure the ecosystem with bacteria, as we already have to shut down the lake on occasion due to bather load and E. coli. All of us have seen that notification come across, no swimming. Adding, let's just say, families of 4 times 36 is 144 additional people, bather load to that lake. Not to mention the boat traffic, everything else that comes along with it. And honestly, the traffic study, I'm not buying it. I'm sorry, I'm not buying it. And even at that fact, 300 cars is a lot for that road. If anyone's ever been on East Shore Road, it is a terrible road. Even after it was redone, it still has problems. So please take that into consideration. And to go back to the water quality, to go back to sewer issues and concerns and septic concerns, just remind you, Pilgrim Pines was required to update their entire system. There are environmental costs to this expansion that have extreme impact on a fragile ecosystem such as Swanzey Lake and Honey Hill. Since Swanzey Lake Campground is nestled directly between those two, some of Swanzey's most valuable resources, there should be extreme caution when considering development for abutting properties. Contributing to the environmental costs, there are exhaust emissions, noise levels, oil drips, fuel spills, combined with disrupted wildlife habitat. There are social costs of conflicting or competing use of trails, lands, water bodies, or inadvertent trespass onto private properties. I actually had trespassers on my property, and they're over 650 feet away currently. That's the closest camper. I actually had people come steal wood off my wood landing. And 150 feet, they're certainly going to be over a lot more. What I've just handed out is the excerpts from New Hampshire Planning and Zoning, Chapter 674, Local Land Use Planning and Regulatory Powers. In particular, attention to the highlighted items. 674-17, purposes of zoning ordinance. To lessen congestion in the streets, to secure safety from fires, panic, and other dangers, to provide adequate light and air, to prevent the overcrowding of land, to avoid undue concentration of population, to facilitate the adequate provision of transportation, solid waste facilities, water, sewerage, schools, parks, child daycare, to assure the proper use of natural resources and other public requirements, to ensure the preservation of agricultural lands and buildings and the agricultural operations described in RSA 2134 as supporting the agricultural lands and buildings. This campground expansion is only going to add to it. 36 fires going next to my house? Adequate light and air, you're going to have smoke from the fires. Overcrowding of land. I actually don't know what the regulation is for population density in the town of Swanzey, but that's a huge number. 36 times 4, 144 people. And obviously, that number is going to fluctuate. Some families of 4, some families of 6, some families of 2. But still, it's going to be a large overcrowding in a very smally, densely populated area. In particular, I'd like to look at RSA 674-2D, states that the master plan purpose and description, a natural resources selection which identifies and inventories any critical or sensitive areas of resources, not only those in the local community, but also those shared with abutting communities. This section, which may specifically include a water resources management and protection plan, shall provide a factual basis for any land development regulations that may be enacted to protect water resources and other identified natural areas. A key component in preparing this section is to identify any conflicts between other elements of the master plan and natural resources, as well as conflicts with the plans of abutting communities. Nothing in this subparagraph shall be construed to permit municipalities to regulate surface or groundwater withdrawals that they are explicitly prohibited from regulating. From time to time, recommend that local legislative body amendments to the zoning ordinance or zoning map or additions thereto. What I've just handed out is a copy of the Town of Swanzey, New Hampshire 2022 Master Plan Update. In the previous RSA 64-2 that I read, it talked about natural resources. The master plan does contain natural resources section. A couple areas of it that I'd like to highlight are areas of special concern may include steep slopes, wetlands, water
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
That off the top of your head, if not.
Yeah, do you know the distance from your property line to where they're going to start construction on their road?
From the maintenance building is.
Well, from your property line to the closest construction on their property?
My property line is pretty much right there, like on that line. It's.
Yeah, but it's good to know the distance because there are side setbacks that are required under the zoning regulations.
They're within the setbacks. It's just because of the lay of the land and the actual foliage and trees in my driveway. My property is pretty much on the edge. My driveway is pretty much on the edge of the setback from my side.
Okay.
Could they remedy any of that with plantings?
No.
Because
The way that the land.
land slopes
Yes,
down.
slopes down, so I'd be viewing it into it.
So there's nothing that could be planted on your property line or their property line that would shield that?
No.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? No, I guess not. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one moment. I'm wondering if the applicant would like to answer any questions on that? Are you okay? Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
This is a hard act to follow.
Yep.
My name is Jeffrey Lapid. I live at 143 West Shore Road, and I'm going to speak tonight as both the president of the Swanzey Lake Protective Association and as a homeowner. The first question I have for you guys, are you aware of the watershed assessment grant that the town of Swanzey was awarded?
Mm-hmm.
You're all
Yes.
familiar with that, right?
We've heard of it. We're
Okay.
probably not as familiar as you are with it, but we've heard of it.
So what this grant does is it assesses the entire watershed. So it looks at the quality of the lake. it looks at, we're going to go, provided we're allowed on the property, assess all the land around the lake and look at the homes, septic systems, landscaping that promotes lake health or not. The biochemical assays that we'll be doing of the lake are going to become a formal recommendation by the environmental group that's running this as to what grants we could get to rectify any problems, both for homeowners, how to get money for the homeowners to upgrade their land if they want, as well as what kind of grants we could get to allow us to counter any negative effects on the lake itself. And then the New Hampshire DES and the environmental group gives us these recommendations and who to contact and where to get the grants, and they leave it in our hands. And we're the ones who have to do the work, the follow-up work to do that. So basically, if I make an analogy, we're going to get an assessment of our current home. And at the end of this process, which will probably be sometime in the fall of 23 or perhaps 24, how to fix any problems, rectify problems, what have you. It's kind of like saying, I want to get my house fixed, but I'm going to okay the contractors to come to build an addition before I know the quality of my house. Just it's illogical to have this proceed right now. Because we need to find out what is the quality of the land and the septic of the current campsite, because they might come in and say, as Janice said, people say there are problems with that. We're going to have an outside assessor come and do that. And they might say, look, this campground needs to have X, Y, or Z done. And at the same time, we're talking about whether or not they can start building more. It doesn't make any sense in that way. So the timing seems really odd for this to get approval. So that says the Lake Association president. I want to talk about 36 campsites and the lake itself now. I'm a distance swimmer, I'm not a boater. My wife is a distance swimmer as well. She's notorious on the lake because the law states that boaters have to give swimmers at least 150 feet so they don't get killed. So she wears a flag when she's swimming. This summer, Shore Patrol followed her around. She's deaf, quite deaf, especially in the water. And they followed her back to our dock. And they're like, you know you're going to get killed if you do this. And she said, well, I have the laws on my side. And they said, they could do that, at your funeral. They could put that on your tombstone if you want. She had the right of way. If there's 15 more boats on this lake, or 10 more boats, one of the things Shore Patrol said was, everybody knows on a busy weekend, every boater on Swanzey Lake is breaking the law in terms of the distance that's supposed to be between boats. 36 more sites and more boats is just going to make it that much more dense and dangerous for kayakers, swimmers, what have you. Right? So, and Jana put it better. There's no need to repeat what Jana said about, you mentioned harmony earlier. And I think that really needs to be addressed. And if I translate that, we want to talk about conservation. And this is a great resource. I moved here from Winchester. And if you've driven down Route 10, you've seen the signs on the Winchester saying, we're screwed in terms of what happened to our lake. We got to try and fix this. At our 3 years ago, or 2019, we had somebody from New Hampshire Lakes come and talk about the effect of invasive species on lakes. And she said, the lake sort of becomes like a big bowl of spaghetti. The gist of it is, for those living on the lake, your property values could drop by as much as 30% if this happens. So I was swimming through Forest Lake, and at some point you couldn't do it because every time you took a stroke, you'd be pulling up vines. And my worry is more boaters, more chances, more nitrogen, more phosphorus. It's going to kill the lake. And it's a resource. And so not only is Jana right about what it's going to do to her property, I'm thinking about the lake itself. And you need to really consider conservation and harmony if you're trying to have a small development come about, as the campground is requesting. And even if they, I don't know the bylaws that you've been referring to with you two guys talking, even if they're within their rights, I think harmony needs to just be addressed. And conservation needs to be addressed. And the little jewel that we have sitting here on Swanzey Lake and Wilson Pond, I don't want it messed with. I've been living here since 2015, and every day something happens in the sky where it just takes my breath away. And I don't want to lose that. And I think that you guys should consider the importance and the value of that as well. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Questions from the board for that gentleman? Okay.
All right. Hello, everyone. Excuse me. Hello, everyone. Bruce Bergstrom, 99 West Shore Road. Bergstrom. All right. So, yeah, I'll try to be quick. I know it's getting late. So I like to speak to health of the lake, as Janet and Jeff did, and how that ties into the master plan, because that's a priority for the town. So I went back before the meeting. I went back and looked at the 2019 minutes to see what was discussed and see what the issues were. And so in that, there's going to be a little math here. So it'll be a test later, but I got some numbers. So in that discussion, in the minutes, it was asked about what we talked about with some of the new campers going over to the lake, because the activity during the day is over on the lakeside. And that's why they call it Swanzey Lake Camping Area, because people want to be on the lakeside. So the question got raised about the existing septic system on the lakeside. And the applicant said they had built a large septic system back in 99, 2000 when it got approved by the state, and that was 2,475 gallons per day. I think that's right. I think that was the testimony. So I thought, okay, seems like a lot. So I went and looked at the state approval, and the math kind of makes sense, but the math was for what was on the property at that time and today. So here's kind of how it works is, so they had 3 buildings, 3 bedrooms each. So it's nine bedrooms. And the state regs are 150 gallons per day. And then they had a little shop that was 45 gallons per day. And then they had 16 RV sites on that side, on the lake side of the road. And 16 or 18. I'll put my glasses on, I'll tell you exactly. 18 RV sites, and those by regulation are 60 gallons per day. So you do all the math, and that's 2475. So that's what was there. So during the discussion in 2019, it was asked about what about all those people coming in over stressing the lakeside septic system, and they said, oh, we have plenty of capacity. Well, that's not really true, because the septic was built for what was there. It wasn't, I don't know whether it wasn't disclosed or talked about, but the state would have no way really of knowing, and there's nothing, because now it's archived, but there's nothing within the state that was ever disclosed that all those people are coming over. So if it was, what it would be is, it would be following the regulations of like a park or a rec area, which would be 5 gallons per person per day. So you start running the math on that, you say 108 sites here, so that's 216, times 5 gallons, that's 1,080, I guess, if I do my math quickly. So then, but if there's showers, you double that. So they do have a bathhouse they built on that side of the lake. So now it's 10, so it's 2016. So then you add the 36, yeah, I told you it was gonna be math here. So then there's 36, and again, this is just given very conservative, just 2 bodies per site, 72 coming over, times 10, 720. So now you're at basically 216% of capacity right now. Well, I know, well, it's almost 200% of capacity right now. And then if you approve this, if it gets approved, you'll be at 216% capacity on a conservative basis on the lake. And then, given the problems the lake has and the charge to protect and preserve the lake, to me, that's an issue. So, second point. It was also brought up in the minutes, they talked about the amount of boats, because they do run sort of a mini marina there, because they do charge, it's a profit center. I get that. But still doesn't make it right, because you get, for the amount of land they have on the lake, they get 7 slips. But even in the meeting, they acknowledged that there were more boats than that typically during the summer. We live across the lake, we can see it, everybody can see it. There's 10 plus. So they're already out of compliance with the state regulations. And what I didn't understand was why no one said anything. I mean, why that other committee just ignored it, but they did. So now you add 36 sites, you're even further out of compliance, more boats, more pollution, more danger, so more harm to the lake. So anyways, I ran through it quickly, but any questions? Yes. Oh, agreed. Agreed. But I would say, I would respectfully say, in terms of pressure on the lake, in terms of preserving that resource, I would say it would fall under that, because your charge is part of the master plan to preserve and protect the bodies of water, including Swanzey Lake. So that would sort of fall under that charge.
I think I'm on, right? Yeah, okay. So I think that they looked at that during that ZBA meeting, right? Somebody went over there on site, or no?
No, that was a different.
That was something else?
That was on the east side.
Okay.
Because there were some pollution issues on the east side they did, but they didn't look at the, as far as I know. I don't believe they looked at it.
I was just wondering if you knew. Thank you.
Right.
Any other members have questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'll keep this really quick because I know we all want to go home. Allison Lee, 103 West Shore Road. Allison Lee, 103 West Shore Road. The 2 questions I have for you is in what Jana, you did an amazing job. When she mentioned the word low-density residential, in my mind, I'm not a professional planning board person. I do not define low-density residential as 108 plus 36 commercial sites. What is your definition? Because that seems a little vague, of low-density residential in the zoning of the agricultural rural.
I see what you mean there. The density actually is pertaining to housing units, is our density, and that it's a low density, just as a general term. You look in the zoning ordinance, and it tells you the exact density, how many units per acre is how it goes.
So how many units per acre do you allow?
Well, they aren't building any units there.
I would disagree with that, because there are a lot of people that come up for the whole summer and live in those trailers. A trailer park, would you put a trailer park there? It's the same thing. They're just on wheels and they can move.
Yeah, I understand that.
It's really something you all need to consider.
You asked me what our density referred to, and that refers to.
Maybe we need to change some zoning rules in the future to
possible.
Protect the town of Swansea.
Always possible,
Also, I read typically, and this was on an engineering site on paving and roadway usage, typically unpaved roads carry less than 150 vehicles per day, And those vehicles tend not to put excess stress on the road structure, meaning logging and things like that. So I do take a little bit of exception in their representation that 300 cars per day on that road would be acceptable.
Thank you.
So I'm Victoria Ames. I live at 60 Honey Hill Road, and I own map 45, lot 37, which is the western side of Honey Hill. And what I have to say is super trivial compared to what Janice said, but I just would like to get it, my request in front of the planning board and the developer, that we love to have people hike on the Honey Hill trails, but we really, and it's actually part of the condition of the conservation easement of that land, that the access to those Honey Hill trails be from Route 32, the parking area on Route 32. So my request would be that the developer not, and the planning board perhaps put this as a condition of approval, that we not incorporate into this plan any kind of trail that would take campers from the campground across onto the Honey Hill trails. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bryant Robertson. I'm 110 Bradford Road, Keene, New Hampshire, but we own 71 West Shore Road. Just a couple of comments. The 25-year storm for the drainage system is completely inadequate in this day and age. I mean, how many times last summer did you see a storm that dumped 2, 3, 4 inches in an hour in this area? It happens far too regularly. It needs to hold at least a 50-year storm, just to preserve the integrity of the lake, to keep the silt and the, what do they call it? Bio or whatever. Just to keep the lake clean. I think the traffic study in 2019 is irrelevant at this point. We all know since COVID, the world has changed, and that goes for the camping industry. They've seen a dramatic increase in new campers. So, and they just attested today that their camper usage is up this coming season. So I would request that they get a new study done that accurately reflects today, not 2019. And I'd also ask why they use water usage that's done 5 years ago. 2017 was the last numbers they showed. I would ask to see something more recent. Again, I'd like to see the septic on the lakeside looked into. And what else would I have? I would not waive the slope on the road, and I would require them to have access year-round for the fire department. And I would also ask you to consider that they upgrade all of their roads inside the development, because it's going to be one commercial entity. So I think they should have to bring everything up to snuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Joe Parisi, 41 West Shore Road. Just to pick quickly up on Brian's comment, a 25-year storm, and this is information that came very recently from an area land developer. A 25-year storm is now happening every 6 years. And if you look at NOAA's data for New England in total, a 100-year storm is now happening every 30 years. So doing a stormwater management study for 25, based on 25-year data, to me, is grossly inadequate. And if this were ever to go forward, I think the developer needs to provide either 50-year data or 100-year data, especially when you look at what you're trying to protect. And that, to me, is the overriding issue here,
The lake is a valuable recreational resource. The lake is a valuable economic resource and represents a large revenue base for the town. So if that lake is harmed in any way, it affects the entire town and the broader community. So this board, I think, has an obligation per the master plan and per RSA to be protecting the resources of the town. The notion that they're building a new septic system to support the 36 new lots to me is somewhat ludicrous when it's going to put a huge demand on the existing system. And at a minimum, that existing system needs to be reviewed. Someone needs to come in and verify that it can support not only its existing load, but the new load. Now, I'd love to see a new system be required, but I'm not sure this board is going to go in that direction. But at minimum, it needs to be reassessed before you would ever allow this, this expansion. My closing point is around the point that was made earlier about the watershed study that's going on. There was a comment made in one of the supporting documents that has been given to this board, and I'll quote from the document. There is concern among the lake neighborhood that the expansion of the campground should not be considered until the watershed management plan is complete. Staff has discussed these concerns with Southwestern Regional Planning, and they have indicated that the plan should not factor into the planning board's decision on this application. How the hell do they know that? They haven't done the study. How can they conclude that the campground and the expansion in the campground won't have an impact on the watershed? So at a minimum, I think this board should be delaying any decision on this application until that study is complete. Now, if I'm the applicant, gee, I don't want my project delayed. The applicant got the special exemption approved 3 years ago, and very little has happened since then. They have submitted an application basically at the deadline of the termination of that special exemption. So to me, there is no compelling urgency demonstrated by the applicant. So I see no downside to delaying any decision on this application until that study is complete. And I would even go as far as to argue is the planning board is not doing their job protecting the interest of the town and the community by making a decision on this application until that point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just to clarify, the reason for that is that the study did not carry any regulatory authority. So without any regulatory authority, the planning board could not use that to deny an application.
I can't fathom why a planning board would ignore data, whether it's covered by some regulatory umbrella or not. It is data that is providing information to you in your decision process. So the notion that it isn't covered by some regulatory authority is ludicrous to me.
Okay, thank you. I understand that. I was just saying that's why Lisa, and I think her name is Lisa Murphy from Southwest Regional, that's why that was her determination that the planning board couldn't make a decision based on that. And anyone else? Come up. Okay, no. I will ask the applicant to address any of the issues he would like to address, and we may have some questions for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. They covered a lot of ground.
That is for sure.
Most of it I've heard before. We covered it all at the zoning board meeting 3 years ago. The zoning board voted in favor of granting the special exception. That decision was appealed, went to Superior Court, and the court upheld the approval of that special exception. So I say that to the board to say, you know, they looked at the impact on values, and it was a close vote, 3-2, in the applicant's favor. And there'll always be disagreement. There's always agreement on the effect on property values. I've done zoning board meetings for most of my 46-year career, and I've heard it hundreds of times. One realtor says it's going to hurt the values, the other realtor says it's not. So you end up with disagreeing experts, and I don't know what the answer is. I'm not going to make it up. So, but the zoning board voted in favor, the court upheld it. So I think we have a solid legal basis to file our application as a use that's now permitted. And that's what's before you. I've done, I don't know how many thousand site plans in my career, and I'm confident that these site plans that were presented to you are in compliance with your regulations and with state regulations. And my understanding of your job is to make sure the plans do comply, and I believe we do. And you're pretty much bound by the rules in that case, and I know you know your job. And I'll jump around a little bit. There was questions about, did we design the stormwater system adequately? When I started my career back in the 70s, a 25-year design storm was 2 inches of rain. And today it's 4.92 inches of rain for a 25-year design storm. The state of New Hampshire monitors rain events year-round, and because now we get rain events even in January on occasion. And they publish the data, they set the design guidelines, they tell us what the design standard needs to be. And the current standard in the state of New Hampshire for a 25-year design storm is to use a type 3 storm, which is a 24-hour event, 4.92 inches of rain. And that's what we use. We put it in the HydroCAD models, and it tells us the size of the stormwater ponds. So that's how that was generated. It's not an attempt to deceive anybody. It's not an attempt to undersize these systems. One thing I have done many, many times over the years is gone back and looked at our stormwater designs, and now that we're getting more and more extreme events, to see if they're holding up. And without exception, they've all held up on the projects I've worked on. And that, to me, is evidence that we're so conservative when we do these designs that factors of safety are built in. And I agree we're getting larger events more frequently than we used to, but I mean, so where does it end? Do I do a 50-year design storm? Do I do a 100-year design storm? We're very aware that Swanzey Lake is nearby. That issue was discussed at length at the zoning board. The drainage in this area and the terrain in this area doesn't allow stormwater to go from this site into Swanzey Lake. It would have to be piped across the road and somehow directed into the lake, and that doesn't happen. It stays on this side of the road, it travels in a southerly direction, never goes toward the lake. So that wasn't a major concern in trying to prevent something from happening that doesn't happen.
Just one question. What sets your criteria between a 25-year storm and, say, a 50-year storm, what you would design for? Because we see a bunch of different ones.
Usually we go to the standard the state requires. If we know we have to get a state permit, the state requires for open stormwater retainage, like we've designed here, to use a 25-year type 3 storm.
And is that
so that's what we do.
For that type of terrain, is that what you're saying? For that type of terrain, they would require
all those factors come into play, and the slope comes into play, the soil type comes into play.
So you submit your plans first to the state, and there?
No, we do our designs. We submit the completed designs if we get approvals from the towns, because the state doesn't want to review it unless it's something that can be built.
That's what
they don't want to
my
waste their
understanding
time.
was,
Right. So if I can't get a local approval, they don't want to waste their time reviewing what we've done.
So if the 25-year storm wasn't good enough for the state, they'd reject it once it gets up there?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So these do go to the state because our septic system and drainage plans get submitted to New Hampshire, state of New Hampshire, assuming we get our local approvals, and they review it for compliance with the regulations. So the septic system, you know, there are a lot of questions, a lot of accusations, a lot of incorrect accusations that came out at the zoning board about failed septic systems and raw sewage running through the streams, through the property. Mike Jasmine went out several times, taking water samples, looking for evidence that there's raw sewage leaking into the stormwater areas passing through the property, found none. So I mean, the issues we understand are concerning and real. I wouldn't want raw sewage passing through my property either, but neither do they. So we spent the money to do the testing, to do the inspections of the existing system. He did have some leaks in his sewer lines that he repaired, and that's the type of maintenance that they have to do.
Is that part of what you submitted here? I see you submitted, or the septic company submitted a report on that existing septic system as well as the new one that they're proposing to build.
We hired them to design the new system and then to look at the nitrate loading that would be occurring on the properties. So we're merging these. So he looked at the existing campground property plus the new campground property, looked at the soils, looked at the slopes, did the calculations to determine the nitrate loading that the state would allow. And the state's very rigid about that. There's no waivers, there's no variances. If you can't meet the nitrate loading, then you can't build it to that capacity. You've got to fit it to the terrain.
Is that the same thing as them certifying the existing system or not?
I mean,
they didn't use that word in there. I'm just asking what they looked at.
What they look at is the nitrate loading that is occurring and that we're proposing to add to it. Can the soils that exist at the site support it?
But that's for the new site, right? The new site you're talking
That's for the merged sites, both sites. He addressed both sites in his letter, which you have a copy of.
Yeah, I have a copy of that.
And he determined that the capacity, maximum loading for lot 23, which is the 18-acre site, is 17,875 gallons per day. And we're proposing less than 2,000 gallons per day. So we're well under that site as it stands alone. When he looked at the 12-acre site, the new site, we're looking at 1,200 gallons per day being added into the nitrate loading, and the soil is capable of supporting 12,551 gallons per day. So we're at 1/10 of what the soil is capable of.
New system there.
Right. So that's a good situation for us. There's plenty of capacity. We don't have to worry about overloading.
There's plenty of soil capacity is what we're talking about there, but I'm wondering, that doesn't really address whether their leach, in the original system I'm talking about, whether that leach field is failing or not. Does it? You know,
this
the soil
doesn't, no. If the board is concerned, then I won't object to a condition of approval that says we have to hire a septic consultant to come in and inspect the existing system for any deficiencies.
Okay. Thank you.
I think it's a legitimate issue, and
I do too. Yeah.
I would be comfortable having that done and getting it addressed.
Okay.
There's a lot of concern about people leaving the campsites and going over to the lake side of the road and using the facilities that exist over there. So if you look at if they use the facilities over there, they flush the toilet, they wash their hands, that's all water usage. So we metered the water usage for 5 years for the 108 existing campsites, and those people, they would do that. During the day, they cross over. They're not going to walk all the way back to the camper to use the bathroom. They use the facility that's nearby. And so that usage was essentially metered. And the metered usage was averaging 10 gallons per day per campsite. So that's a little over 1,000 gallons a day that was generating if every site used it on the lake side. So, and that system was designed and approved and constructed for 2,400 gallons, or 2,400 gallons per day. So there is capacity to support that. If we used 60 gallons per day per campsite, the standard state design guideline, which we proved is way too high for the actual usage at the site by doing the metering, then for the 36 campsites times 60, you're looking at 2,160, if I did the math right in my head, gallons per day. And they're questioning, are we going to overtax the well that's there? The well has been tested for capacity. Most recently was, I think, 3 years ago when we filed our ZBA application. Our concern at the time was the well, it's not a new well, so over time it could fill with sediment, reduce capacity, but it hasn't. It's 20 gallons per day, 20 gallons per minute capacity, which adds up to over 14,000 gallons per day that can be pumped from that well without draining it, without the well collapsing. So it has so much capacity that I'm not concerned if they end up, if we use 60 gallons per day per campsite, you're still only looking at that couple thousand gallons per day. We're way under what the capacity of the well is. So I don't think we're going to drain the aquifer or cause other wells around us to fail. If they didn't fail last year when the drought, then this is not going to force it to happen. I'm not going to try to address all the issues about smoke and noise, and I mean, I don't know if that's a planning board concern or not. The smoke is depending on the wind direction primarily. Having been at the site several times now, I mean, I've personally witnessed smoke coming across the lake from the west, which is the normal wind direction, west to east in our area, into this area. So not all the smoke people are smelling is going to come from the new campsites. The buffers, I believe, are adequate. We're not, under your zoning regulations, we're allowed to build up to 20 feet from the sideline on the property. And we're not doing that. The nearest campsite is over 100 feet from the property line. And we're leaving all that area undisturbed. We're not cutting trees, we're not thinning it out, and we don't have any reason to do that. The maintenance building itself acts as a barrier, as a fence. That's why we have no openings on the north wall of that building. This is a solid wall. That's an obstruction between the active areas, the campsites, and that residential area to the north. So I purposely did that in design, trying to take advantage of that as a solid fence. So I don't think it's fair to say that because you can go out in the wintertime when there's no vegetation on the trees and look through and see the house from that site. When the campground is active, there is vegetation. There is low vegetation and shrub. There's leaves on the trees, in addition to the pines that are there, because it's a mixed type of forested area. So the zoning board went to the site. They felt that the buffer was adequate. And so I think that's been adequately addressed and approved by your zoning board.
Do you, off the top of your head, know what the setback of that utility building is from your property line?
I can measure it and tell you exactly.
Be my guess.
This is a 100 scale on the overall plan.
Mm-hmm.
So measuring from the property line to the back wall of the building is 100. It's almost exactly 100 feet, maybe 98.
Okay, thank you.
And the closest campsites are on the other side of our roadway.
And measure that. Yeah, measure your closest campsite.
Closest campsite visually is the corner of this
Thank you.
I'm not sure what else I need to try to address. If the board has something, I'll be happy to try to address it.
Mr. Malone had a question for you.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk about 20-year, 25-year, 50-year floodplain. Those are, just to be clear, those are minimum standards, correct?
Yes.
That is state mandated based on statewide information, not local information.
I mean, if I can correct that, the state does monitor rain events because it's different in the southeast part of the state and the southwest part of the state, and it's different up north. Rain events up north are lesser events than they are in the south, so our numbers here are higher than the design storms in northern Maine.
Okay, so a 25-year storm here is different than a 25-year storm up north.
Yes.
And the standards that you applied were local standards?
Yes.
Okay. Now, a different question. Is there some shrubbery or shrubbing that you can put behind the building or around the campsite that would buffer sound to the neighbors?
I guess I'm not sure how to do that. How do I?
An arborist, perhaps?
Well, I worked a lot with arborists, with landscape architects. It's a difficult task to.
It won't eliminate it completely, that
right.
I understand.
Yes, it can.
But it might soften the impact.
Arborvitae is a good type of vegetation for screening visually and for buffering sound, if you can put it close enough to the source of the sound. It wouldn't do any good to plant arborvitae along the property line and expect that to provide any buffering sound-wise from activities that are 100 feet away to the south. So we would have to plant something like arborvitaes in close proximity to each campsite in order to try to buffer the sound from it.
Would that be something you would consider?
No.
No, okay.
I didn't want to beat around the bush. Be cute about it. The bottom line is, no, it's just not practical. Then, what do you do if one of the arborvitaes dies in 5 years? Are we posting security? Are we trying to monitor the health of the plants? And I just think leaving a 100-foot forested buffer area, leaving it undisturbed, is a good approach, and I think it's a reasonable approach.
Ms. Johnson?
Is it unreasonable to ask if this is developed that they would put in rules for their campers, like curfew for outdoor fires and outdoor parties and that sort of thing? Because when Ms. Blake was reading that off, that's why I thought to myself, maybe they shouldn't be allowed to tie dogs unattended at their camp when they go away. And then, of course, campers are going to say, oh, that's too many rules. But you have to consider the other side, too.
Yeah.
You can't just move in on a community and make it miserable.
And that's a good question. There are rules for the campground.
There are?
And yes, and the curfew is 10 o'clock. That's when the quiet period starts. They're given their sheet of rules when they agree to rent a campsite. There were questions about boats. Some people want to bring boats. Some people want to use the boats that are there. The existing campground has 9 boat slips and 9 moorings. And the state has been called several times about those numbers. Under today's regulations, they would be entitled to 7 boat slips, not 9. But because the 9 have been there so long, they're grandfathered. And they're allowed to keep their 9, but they can't add any more. They're not proposing to add any more. They're not proposing to add any more moorings. So they have enough. They have kayaks and canoes that are available for campers to use or to rent. And some of the boats that are there at their boat slips aren't from campers. They're from other Swansea residents. And I don't need to name names, but a previous fire chief used to keep his boat there. And so it's, that's something that's, I don't think is going to change because they're not allowed to add to it. There is a public boat launch nearby. They have no control over that. If somebody brings a boat and goes to the public boat launch and launches their boat, they're allowed to do that. And we can't prohibit them from doing that. That's their right. And it's a public boat launch for a reason, to allow public access. So unless you're cutting that off, I don't see how you're going to eliminate a lot of the boating that occurs on the lake. But we're not adding to it, we feel, because we're not allowing them to moor a boat. If somebody brings a boat, they don't have room for them to store it in the campsite, so they discourage it. They can't prevent them from bringing it and storing it somewhere else, going during the day and launching it at the boat launch and then bringing it out of the water at night. They can do that. Anybody can do that. If you want me to look at a 50-year design storm, I'm willing to do that. I'll come back to the board and say we looked at it, and here's how our capacity compares to a 50-year design storm.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Fippard?
Well, I would just say that my largest concern of this project has been from the get-go a conservation-based concern. Because like someone has said, this is a Swanzey resource and it'll take just so much, and I'm concerned to put that much more on it. This picture too, talking about the wood growth or tree growth on the property. Is this the property?
She didn't share any of that with me. I haven't seen any of that.
See how barren that looks. The trees are.
I don't know what that's a picture of.
Yeah, I don't know either. But it measures the distance.
It's Google Images, it's actually a Google image. And if you'd like me, once she's done, I will explain more.
Yeah, I'd like to know why it's so bare there.
That's my property.
Oh, this is your lot?
Correct.
Okay, that's not where the campers are gonna be.
No,
It's gonna be just inside of it.
Yeah.
Well, all the trees going away. All the trees going away.
Well, that makes a difference. I thought that's where the campground was gonna be.
I think I want to clarify, all the green is not going away. I mean, that's the whole purpose. That was the challenge here, was to carve in these sites in that existing forested area, leaving most of the trees. The last thing they want to do is remove all the trees like the neighbor did, and we don't want to clear cut the lot. Although, yeah.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Fippard? All right, thank you. We have a few residents that want to ask a few questions. You can come up, yeah.
My name is Bud Windsor. I live at 28 West Shore Road. One thing Mr. Fippard said was, I take exception to, is that all the runoff from that property would stay on that property. But I believe there's a culvert that runs right underneath West Shore Road, and East Shore Road, and that water heads right to the lake, and it's usually active most of the year. So I don't know how you can say that the runoff doesn't go across the road and stays on that property. From what I remember, it doesn't. So.
Would you like to address that, Mr. Fippard?
I know there are 2 culverts under this gravel driveway that we want to use as our emergency access into the site. And it drains from this property, which is owned by Swanzey Lake Campground, under the road into this property. So
Mr. Fipper, would you just put up the drainage plan? Because, yeah, what we're looking at is drainage from the site that is affected by this expansion. You're not disturbing any of the other sites around you, but the site that the expansion is going to be at is where you're addressing your drainage, correct?
Yes.
And you're containing your drainage to that site.
Yes.
So would you just point that out, please?
We're creating 2 areas to collect stormwater. We're directing it surface flow to swales into these areas, another area here, and these have been sized for the 25-year design storm.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? It's pretty much evident that the water from the site is designed to go into those 2 areas that you just pointed out, and the rest of the area is not going to be disturbed. Okay, so I think there's someone else who had a question.
Bruce Bergstrom again, 99 West Shore. I am pleased that the applicant admitted that they are putting more water into the septic than was designed. Because there is, he said, maybe 1,000 gallons a day. Or no, you talked about the people coming over using the bathrooms. So the septic was designed, been a state approval for what was on the property. There was no disclosure to the state of the across the road and those folks coming over. So he did acknowledge that those people are coming over and using another 1,000 gallons of water into the septic system. So that was an acknowledgement that they are using it beyond its intended purpose and intended load. And another thing was, I could acknowledge that they are kind of running a marina there, because if you have people that aren't even campers that are renting spaces there, then it just puts a lot of stress on the lake. So having a de facto marina.
Okay. Yep. And he also agreed that if the planning board so desired, they would have that septic system, the original septic system certified.
Again. But I wanted to make sure I understood that, because there is a septic system, the new septic system, but then for the 108 sites, is there another septic system for that? No, go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Because then, so would there really be 3? The new one, the 108 sites, and that one? I'm just curious.
There are 2 existing systems. One is on the lake side of East Shore Road, over here, and there's another system roughly in this area for in the existing campground.
Mm-hmm. And that's the one you were referring to have certified, correct? The one down in this lower corner.
Whichever one, I think the concern is on the lake side.
It is.
Is what I'm hearing.
It is, I think it is, yeah.
So, I mean, I'm willing to go have that inspected and certified.
Okay,
recertified.
Great, thank you.
Follow up.
Yes.
So certified, and that would include, I presume, because the state wouldn't approve a septic, because they approved it based on what was there. They had no knowledge of the 108 site, well, it'd be 144 sites or whatever, of all those folks coming over on a daily basis. So that would actually, you'd probably have to put in a new septic, because that's not what it was approved for. Well, not that it doesn't work, but if there's an approval, so see what the state says.
You'd have to at least determine that all of those people are going to come over and use that specific system, which I don't know they would or wouldn't, but the septic designer would be the one that would certify the system. The state would look over maybe their plans, but the designer himself would certify it. Is that correct? Yes. And yes, he should be aware that there will be extra people using that system over there when they do certify it. And yeah, you would agree. Okay, good. Thank you.
So, Allison Lee, 103 West Shore Road again. If I can go back to the larger view. From what was described by Jana, it seems like her property is referred to as an upland property, correct? It's up on a hill slope.
It looks it, yes.
Right. So the assumption is that there's probably been, over time, drainage, natural surface waters draining from her property down to this other spot. You might want to assume that because there was no development, so that land was perking, right? It was absorbing that land. In your study, because I experienced this, I have firsthand experience with this, people don't anticipate all the time what the impact is going to be. So now that I know you're saying you're not going to cut down all the trees, and I'm glad to hear that, because trees are what gives us our air and animals and everything else. But when I look at your plan and I see the amount of what is going to be dirt for the camper, then it's got to be hard packed enough that they can bring their wheeled heavy vehicle in and have their picnic tables and their fire pits and their wood with char. And then you have a road that again has to be something that you don't sink into, right? So is that considered impervious surface, all of those areas?
It's not paved, so I don't think so.
I think
I might be wrong on that one.
I think it might be
But again,
considered. I have a gravel driveway, and it's impervious.
Okay, you're getting at a point, right?
My point is that what used to be natural woodland that used to accept Honey Hill's water and Gianna Blake's water and allow the water to disperse naturally, it's called sheet flow, is now going to be concentrating into just these two swales that you have probably designed for this area. So my question to you, sir, is whether or not you've calculated the amount of surface waters in that 25-year storm coming from Honey Hill and Jana, because I'm concerned of the capacity of those swales. Because in 2021, the state, this isn't you, I understand it's not you, but the state is grossly underestimating what a 25-year storm is. And they need to update those numbers. That's not our concern, that's the state's concern, but if anyone from the state is out there listening, you need to look at that. So my question to you is, if you could address that, whether you've taken it into consideration so that, I don't know who owns the property down to the right, but if they're still even further downland, you should be concerned.
Well, he already stated that he'd do a 50-year flood.
He would do a 50-year flood. But again, it concerns me that we've now lost all of the absorption field for the sheet flow of all of the upland property. We're talking Jana's property, we're talking Honey Hill.
Yeah, but...
And even though he's leaving a few trees, I already am having trees topple over because there's so much more water in the land. And what happens when your land is saturated, your tree roots can't hang on and they fall over.
Okay, but under site plan regulations, it only has to do with the water on the property that's being developed.
I understand, which is incredibly short-sighted for not you, but whoever the government agency is that's writing these RSAs. It's not sufficient to protect people who have properties and rights. And the only remedy in the state of New Hampshire is to bring a lawsuit. And guess what? In the state of New Hampshire, if you bring a lawsuit, you don't get reimbursed, even if you win the case.
Well, we aren't there yet.
So what I'm saying to you is that New Hampshire rules are insufficient to protect the property owners, but we as a town, we as a community can protect each other by making the right decisions and making sure that the party is going to do everything they can within their power to protect the neighborhood.
And we see that they do. We make sure that, like they set up a drainage plan, like these swales, it shows how he's going to carry the water down to the swales. Now it's not going to leave the property, but we can't expect him to have control over water that comes from someone else's property.
Right.
You got to draw the line someplace.
Right, but his property was the one that was taking care of and absorbing that land. So once he
Right,
alters that property, it's going to become the person down below's property.
But again, it's his right as long as he keeps all the drainage on his property, from his property.
I just wanted to know if you took that into consideration.
The short answer is yes. All the gravel area, the pad sites for the campers, we consider impermeable. We treat it the same as asphalt, even though it's gravel. And I'm just going to give you a quick lesson on the basics of drainage design. So we look at a site, we look at the topography. A lot of the runoff that's coming from the residential property to the north, you can see the shape of the contour lines here. So a lot of this runoff goes this way. And it's not affected by anything we're proposing to do because it's essentially bypassing our area. The runoff that goes this way, a lot of this goes into the other property owned by Swanzey Lake Campground. So there's only a small portion of this that comes into play with our changes on the property. So when we look at that, we look at the soil type, we look at the terrain, we look at the vegetation. A treed lot, even on a 10% slope like much of this, we use runoff coefficients. And the runoff coefficient, the higher the runoff coefficient, the more runoff. So pavement, for example, we use 95 for a runoff coefficient. Because even on pavement, you don't get 100% runoff. There's cracks, there's divots, there's potholes. So in the engineering world, we use 95 as that runoff coefficient. On a natural vegetated lot, we use 35 for that runoff. So you see the difference between a vegetated site and a site that has a lot of gravel and a lot of pavement. So that factor shows you the effect. So in this case, we took all the gravel areas, we took each campsite, we took all of that area, and we applied the 95% runoff coefficient. And for the other areas that remain treed and undisturbed, it's 35%. We add in an estimate of flow coming from the neighbor's property. So we did the same thing she did. We looked at Google Earth. Actually, we used granite maps, which is similar to Google Earth, to see what the vegetation is and what the topography is like on the neighboring land. And we can apply a factor to say, okay, we've got off-site runoff coming into the site. Because they nearly clear-cut most of that land, the runoff was higher than it would be if it had remained forested. So that was factored in. And that's part of the calculation to come up with the 25-year capacity that we chose to store completely on site. So the complete 25-year volume, and I forget exactly what the number is stored. So it's not overflowing, we're not subtracting for infiltration into the ground, even though with this soil type, you do get infiltration into the ground. So the soils are pretty good here, and it perked at less than 5 minutes per inch, which is a good safe perk rate. It's not too fast, so you're not worried about contaminating groundwater, and it's at a reasonable rate. So I know this is a conservative design, and I think when I factor all that in, I'll be close to the 50-year design capacity. But I'll do that and send the information to the board.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Any questions from the board on the drainage? No? Okay.
Hi, Sherry Domina, 227 Swanzey Lake Road, and I'm also Chair of the Conservation Commission. And I know you've heard the Conservation Commission's concerns about the additional fires, potential dog waste, bathrooms and septic capacity, as well as additional boats on the lake. I just wanted to mention a couple things that hadn't been brought up yet. One is that we both know that dog waste and human waste are big factors in pollution. I personally live just down Perry Brook. We use the water that comes out of the lake to irrigate our cornfield. We also all know that when you have kids, especially, and you go to the lake, a lot of times you don't use the restroom. You pee directly in the lake, or worse, if you're a kid. And I know if I did a show of hands around the room, how many people have peed in Swanzey Lake? I think most of us are guilty, at least once or twice. If you've got, 100 and so additional kids coming from a campground, you're going to have a number of kids peeing in the lake every day. It's not sterile. It does contribute to pollution. Also additional dog waste. And so, well, before I get into dog waste, so I just want to make sure I have not been to the bathrooms at the campground, so I don't know what they're like. So I would just encourage that the bathrooms there not only are able to handle people using them, but that they are also open, airy, accessible, and kid-friendly, that encourage people to use them. I lived for 25 years at a public facility in Maine on a lake, and part of my job was cleaning the bathrooms, and so I know how that goes. We had pretty creepy, scary bathrooms full of spiders, and not an awful lot of people used them, which meant they were using the lake instead. Also, for dog waste, I would just ask that we make sure that they have rules and regulations at the campground about that, how it's disposed of, and have places where people can dispose of it, and have doggy waste bags and things like that that make that easier. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeffrey Lapid, 143 West Shore Road. Please don't grant the 10% waiver. If you keep looking for regulations to try and stop this, don't grant the 10% waiver. That's within the regs.
Thank you.
Jana Blake, 111 East Shore Road. So, Jim, I'd like to ask why the plan that you submitted, the distance is...
You can ask me, I'll ask him.
Okay, well, that's fine. Why the plan that he submitted, this actually came from the original packet for this meeting, why is it not the same distance? Because obviously the scale on here is what I went by.
Oh, you mean the setback distance between your house and, okay, yeah, that.
And to answer your question, Michael, it's 50 feet per this. It's 50 feet to the maintenance building. So I don't know where the difference is between what he submitted to what he has there, but why would anybody make any assumptions otherwise?
Well, what he has there is what we have here. These are the plans we're going by. I don't know what that one is all about, but this is what the planning board goes by, and I had measured it before he got up and said what the setbacks were, and they were pretty close to what I measured on this drawing here. I measured 110 feet, he measured 100 feet from the property line to the back of that storage building, or the maintenance building there. I don't know what it is to your house setback there, but I'm just saying that these are the plans we're going by, not that one that you see that might be off.
Okay, understood.
Okay, you still want him to address that? Why there's a discrepancy there?
No, it just, I want to make sure that whatever he's being, is submitting is
this one.
Not 50 feet
Yeah, it's not that one. No.
to my property line.
Right.
Additionally, obviously I have concerns about people trespassing on my property. And obviously he's stating that they're unwilling to do anything to create any sort of a buffer. So should the planning board approve this, how am I going to be guaranteed that I'm not going to have all these people coming over to my property? It's a very valid concern.
Buy a shotgun.
I did take Hunter's safety. But seriously, everything, not joking here, is even with 100 feet, I'm going to go back to the photos that I submitted, okay? And I want to also clarify one thing. My property is not clear-cut whatsoever, so that's why I would actually recommend a site walk, because you will all clearly see that my property is not clear-cut. Granted, it's Google Images, it's not great. My father did log the property before I purchased it off him in 2003. And then also, I think he did, well, originally when I bought the property it was 5 acres, and then he sold his property, and I bought the additional land and did a boundary line adjustment, so now I have 13.2 acres. So, or just over that. But anyway, during that time he did some logging, but still, there is tons of trees left. It's not clear-cut whatsoever. But to go by this picture here, from the corner of my house to here is 150 feet. So if he's talking from the property line, it's 100 feet, we're still pretty darn close to my home.
So is that tree line your property line, or is it not?
Yes.
That's where your property line ends, right about where it was logged off then?
And that's why I would suggest a site walk, so that to get a full-scale representation instead of just a picture that it's hard to tell.
The reason I ask you that is because still the way the site is drawn here, you can measure on the site to see the distance between that building and that property line, and it is 100 feet. So if your property line ends where the trees begin, it's 100 feet of trees from there.
Well, there's a little bit in there. I just can't tell you exactly where it is, but
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Any questions from the board? Nobody? Okay. I guess no questions.
Thank you.
Just a second, Mr. Fipper, something to say.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention they do have rules. They do have rules regarding pets, and they require them to clean up after their pets. If you own a dog, I bet you know what this is. These are poop bags, little plastic bags. They sell these at the store, at the campground, and they require the individual renters at the campground to clean up after their pets.
Thank you. I can cross that question off my list then.
Okay. I'm not sure, I mean, maybe she printed that plan on a home printer, download it, and so it's going to be a greatly reduced version, and it's not unusual to get the scale distorted. But the plans you have, the plans I submitted, are accurate engineered drawings, and I'll stand by that dimension.
Okay, yeah. These are the ones we're going by. Mr. Malone, yes.
As many of you know, I'm an apartment dweller. And I just received a notice from my landlord, the entire complex did, that all dog owners have to bring their dog for DNA testing. And apparently they're going to be checking the dog droppings, which might be something that you might want to consider.
I don't know, maybe. Go ahead.
Since you handle the dog waste, I was just wondering about the unattended dogs and barking and things like that. Is there a rule?
Yeah, they're supposed to control their dogs. If there's barking, that's more than a normal bark from a dog. If it's excessive barking, they're going to be told to rein them in or to get them in to stop the barking. That's all in their rules to control their pet. So if they're walking around the lake, they're expected to be on a leash and they're expected to clean up the dog droppings. So.
Are those expectations enforced? Is there anyone
To the
there?
degree that they can, they do enforce their rules. They do have people, they have staff working in the store and doing maintenance, walking around the campground. If they see something inappropriate, they call them on it. So if they see piles of dog waste and they're always in the same location adjacent to a certain campsite, they're going to question the owner and say, this isn't acceptable, and you've got to clean this up and control your dog. And they've had those issues in the past, so we talked about it. I've heard of the DNA issue before. Some municipalities do it. I wish Keene would do it. My wife and I walk on the rail trail, and I mean, that's used as a pet waste ground. It's just really disgusting down by the college. It's awful.
You might not be able to just blame that on the dogs.
I won't go there, so. Is there anything else?
Any other questions for Mr. Fippard? Thank you. Now, Richard, you had mentioned something.
May I make a motion that we continue this due to the hour until next meeting?
Just a moment. Would you like to say something, or you had a question?
Jana Blake, 111 East Shore Road. I'd just like to add that I abut Honey Hill, and I hear everything that goes on Honey Hill. And Honey Hill is quite a bit farther away from me than this campground will be. I can literally hear conversations that people are having as they're switchbacking back and forth up the hill. I can hear their dogs barking. That's significantly farther away than this proposed buffer. So there's no way in heck that that is going to, the sound is not going to carry. It just is. It's just the nature of the land. And it's like a giant tunnel right there, and it just kind of sound reverberates off of everything. And like I said, I can clearly hear everything that's going on Honey Hill when people are hiking.
You're not helping your case. If you can hear everything on Honey Hill and the land reverberates, and you're acting like there's nothing can be done about it.
I'm just saying it's an issue. So no, there is something that can be done about it. You can deny it because it is unharmonious with the natural environment around. Like I said, Swanzey Lake Campground is a jewel sitting between two jewels. You have Honey Hill, you have Swanzey Lake Campground. To add this is not going to be harmonious.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you ask a question? Okay, Richard.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion that we continue this meeting until our next scheduled meeting due to the hour.
Okay, a motion to continue the public hearing until our next meeting, which is when, Sarah? Which is the 26th of January. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Brandon Self. Is there any further discussion?
Is there any way we could do a site walk?
Yeah, we could do a site walk during that time. Yeah, we could do that. Let's see. We can still vote on the motion and discuss the site walk as well. Right, okay, so we have a motion on the floor to continue this public hearing and all the rest of the agenda items on our agenda until next meeting, which is, again, I just forgot the date, January 26th, thank you. And there's a second by Brandon Self. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye. All those opposed? Okay, the motion passes. So, site walk, we're talking about a site walk.
Yeah, how would you do that, given that it gets dark by 5 o'clock?
It would have to be done on a different day.
Yeah, on a weekend or, yeah, probably weekend. We've done them on weekends a lot before, actually, just because of that purpose. Yes? Oh, wait a minute, folks. Everybody leaving? We're discussing a site walk, and the public needs to be in on discussion if you want to. I can't make you stay, but we're discussing a site walk, and we're probably going to set a date and time for that. So if you'd like to stick around until we resolve that, it'll probably be in your interest. Continue. Yep. Well, that can be part of the site walk. It's, what, 150 feet away from the nearest campsite there, so it's not that far. We could do that. So what works for everyone? If we want to do it before our next meeting, which would be advisable, does this weekend, or can it be this weekend then? No, not this weekend. Saturday can't. So Saturday the 21st is... All right, Saturday the 21st. Okay, so what time? At 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock? 1 o'clock?
Can I weigh in on this?
Yes, you can.
Since it includes me, and I would definitely like to be there. I am a DJ as well, and I actually do have an obligation on the 21st in the afternoon, evening, so I would prefer morning if possible.
Can all the board members make it at 10 o'clock in the morning? You're working, right? Everybody else, though? Well,
That would just be probably cumbersome, I would think.
well,
I think, yeah, I believe I could do it at noon.
it would. It looks
Okay.
like it works for everyone. So would that work for you then?
Yes, we'll do noon.
The 21st
Be close, but I'll do it.
at noon?
Yep.
And okay, and where are we going to meet? That's a good question. Are you going to be up for that? You can make that. I forgot to ask you, I'm sorry. So, where would be a good place to meet on the site so you could just show us around? Right at the East Shore Road or something at the entrance, or?
Would you rather just seriously park at my house and walk in? It's a lot closer. I mean, seriously, it really is. Instead of walking, it's a quarter mile up through the woods if you go from East Shore Road versus 150 feet in and then go backwards into the campground.
Well, do the rest of the board members want to see the whole site, or are we just looking at her place?
She has a afternoon engagement that day.
Yeah.
Maybe we should try to get to her as close to noon time as possible, meeting her place.
Oh, and then do the rest of the site after that, perhaps? All right, that sounds like a good solution then.
I mean, it's pretty easy, right straight through the woods to that area. There's actually trails that are kind of already there a little bit.
Okay, then we'll meet at your site. And what is your address, so everyone knows what the address is?
111 East Shore Road.
Okay.
And anybody else that's here that would like to attend, you are welcome to come along.
Okay, so the site walk is actually an extension of the public hearing. So when we do a site walk, it's actually opening the public hearing during the site walk, and it's recorded, and then we're closing that part of the meeting. Then we continue the public hearing back here. You had something to say? Okay. All right. And you'd be able to do that? Great. Okay, then it's settled. Mr. Fippard, just one question from you. Will we be able to see where that maintenance building is going to be? Is it staked out or any kind of a determination where that building would be? Pardon me? You will. Okay, good. That's what we'll need.
I used Gaia GPS on my phone, and I can literally start it, and we can walk in. It shows you how many feet you've walked in and everything. So, I mean, that's how I used it to get my measurements on stuff. So it's actually a known app on your phone. So.
Okay, then it's Saturday the 21st at your house at noontime. That's good for everyone. Okay. We voted to adjourn the meeting? No, we're adjourned, okay. So, yeah, continue the public hearing until the next meeting, which is the 21st.